Chapter 76. Line Fruit. Looking at the devil fruit in his hand, Ush couldn't help but hesitate. The ability of this fruit allowed its user to freely manipulate the threads. The body could generate threads that remotely control others, tie onto clouds to enable flight, control multiple people's movements, and use invisible threads to cut through people or objects. However, it couldn't control a person's will. In the One Piece anime, this fruit belonged to Doflamingo. While the fruit itself was considered average, Doflamingo had demonstrated its terrifying potential through skill and creativity. This was the first time Ush had manifested this fruit, so he hesitated. After all, aside from combat applications, if the user knew medical skills, it could even simulate Maki's nen stitching. It could potentially remove diseased tissue, or even treat cancerous growths. However, sigh. Forget it, Ush muttered. Now's not the time to think about that. It's not like I won't be able to manifest it again later. Click. He bit into the thread fruit, and while playing with the threads emerging from his fingertips, began manifesting the next miracle fruit. 1, 2. This time, luck was on his side. On the 6th try, Ush successfully manifested the spiritual exercise fruit he had just designed. Without hesitation, he ate it. Then he sat quietly, trying to sense the changes within himself. As the fruit's power took hold, Ush felt something awaken in his mind. His spiritual power seemed to stir. He focused deeply, but after a few minutes of no noticeable change, he gave up with a confused expression. Maybe it just needed more time to activate. Either way, the next step was to charge the fruit's energy using external life force. Though the airship didn't have much to absorb, Ush reached through the layers below, tapping into the life energy in the land beneath the flying vessel. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to charge the fruit for now. Now it was a waiting game. If his spiritual power showed signs of growth, then the fruit had worked. If not, he'd go back to the drawing board. A full day passed. Gone. That spiritual exercise fruit idea was brilliant, Ush shouted that night, standing in the center of his room with excitement. Around him, his aura surged like crashing waves. To someone unfamiliar, it might not seem unusual, but Ush knew. His manifest and potential aura had increased. Not by a massive margin, but enough to be noticeable. And certainly more than what he'd managed in the past few days. The realization made Ush grin with satisfaction. Phew. Can't get too excited, he reminded himself. If my aura increases too fast, my control will weaken. I've got to keep practicing aura control. And with that, the room grew quiet once more, except for the occasional low hum of nen energy swirling gently around him. 2 more days passed. On the 3rd day, the airship landed on the tarmac of a massive luxury hotel. All candidates, please enjoy some rest. This hotel, owned by the Hunter Association, has been fully booked for the final test, the intercom announced. Soon after, the candidates were led into a massive banquet hall. The tables and chairs had been cleared, leaving only a large whiteboard covered with a sheet. Everyone gathered in front of Chairman Netero, alongside the other examiners, the bean-faced secretary, and a group of men in black suits, the same monitoring team from before. One man in black, sporting massive eye bags, kept glancing nervously at Ush. This was the same unfortunate soul who'd been assigned to monitor him during the 4th phase, and who hadn't slept properly in 7 days. Ush didn't even notice the poor guy. His attention was on the whiteboard. Boom. This year's final hunter test will be conducted in a series of one-on-one duels, Netero announced, pulling away the cloth covering the board. These are your matchups. As the candidates looked up, their matchups were revealed. Oh? I'm still considered one of the top contenders? Ush thought, blinking in surprise. The matchups didn't differ much from the original plot. He had assumed he would only get 3 matches, but now it looked like he was expected to fight in 5. According to the list, Ush's first opponent was Kurapika. If he lost, his next match would be against Tesshizuka. Fortunately, Netero didn't pair him against Gon. Ush let out a subtle sigh of relief. To pass, you only need to win once, Netero continued, holding up a single finger. One win is all it takes. Ush blinked. He had expected only one winner to be chosen in the final test. But this was different. Now, 9 people had a chance to pass. This test is surprisingly friendly, Ush thought, his eyes narrowing slightly. Still, I'd better win early. I don't want to end up dueling someone like Hisoka for no reason. Chapter 77. Why is the grouping so unfair? Badoro asked with a frown. According to the match chart, he only had 3 chances, missing the full 5 chances by 2. Good question, Nitro said matter-of-factly. This grouping is based on the previous test results. That is, candidates with better results will get more opportunities. If Ush didn't already know about the old man's bad taste, he might have actually believed him. Still, the current setup favored him, so he saw no reason to speak up and ruin it for others. Killua frowned, unconvinced. I don't get it. You better explain how the scoring works. No way. Nitro suddenly roared after a moment of muttering. The volume made Killua flinch and cover his ears. Why not? Killua shouted angrily. Because it's confidential. But I'll say this much, the scoring criteria fall into 3 broad categories: physical ability, mental strength, and overall impression, Nitro said, now stroking his beard. Among them, the most important is the impression. Specifically, your potential to become a hunter. This was true, but Ush knew it didn't necessarily relate to one's potential as an end user. That part didn't factor into the final test. In this final round, there are no restrictions on weapons or specific rules for the duels. However, there is one condition for victory: you must make your opponent admit defeat, without killing them. If you kill your opponent, you are disqualified immediately, and the rest of the candidates will pass automatically. After Nitro finished explaining, he nodded to a nearby staff member. Then, the first round begins now, Hanzo vs. Gon. Please step forward. The big-nosed staff member echoed the announcement as Hanzo and Gon moved to the center of the cleared area. Everyone else stepped back to the walls of the hall. Thud. Ush immediately sat down cross-legged on the floor. This action drew attention from others. Hey, Ush, you're in the second round, should you really be relaxing like that? Leorio asked loudly, pointing at him. Ush yawned, raised an eyebrow lazily, and said, why not? There's no chair here. Should I squat against the wall? No, I mean, you should be warming up. The match will end soon, and you might need to jump right in. Ush paused, then waved a hand with a laugh. This match won't end quickly. The condition is to make the opponent admit defeat, not beat them unconscious. That's easy for us, but... He trailed off and glanced over at Gon. Hearing that, both Kurapika and Killua's expressions changed. They knew Gon's personality well enough to realize, getting him to admit defeat would be next to impossible. And although they might want to advise him to give up, they couldn't. He'd come all this way, and they knew he wouldn't quit so easily. Meanwhile, the proctors had their own conversation. That guy really saw right through it, Mankey said, referring to Ush. But that kid, there's no way someone wouldn't admit defeat, right? No. If it's Gon, it might really be possible, said Satots. He remembered Gon's behavior back in the Trick Tower and didn't think Mankey was right. Booer looked toward Nitro. President, what do you think? Oh, how would I know? Nitro chuckled mischievously. Begin. The referee suddenly shouted. Whoosh. Gon immediately dashed sideways, trying to use his speed to find an opening. But the gap in their skill was too great. In the blink of an eye, Hanzo appeared right in front of him, completely cutting off his momentum. Smack. Under Gon's shocked expression, Hanzo delivered a swift knife hand to his head, knocking him dizzy. Thud. The next moment, Gon collapsed onto the ground. TCH. It begins, Ush thought with a sigh. Honestly, he didn't enjoy watching people get beaten down like this. It made him feel kind of twisted. If it's a real enemy, fine, Just kill them. And if the enemy destroyed your home or hurt your family? Well, that's on you for not preparing. If someone's capable of that level of harm, and you didn't set up any protection, then you really were asking for it. That's why before coming here, Ush had already asked Rin Immortal to watch over his family. In case of emergency, Rin would contact him immediately. With his current ability to teleport 3 kilometers in one step, he could return to York New City in just a few hundred steps. Too slow? Just shrink the steps. Either way, he'd get there. In other words, Ush's family was safe. Back at the scene, Gon, dizzy and barely conscious, struggled to his feet. He couldn't do it alone, so Hanzo lifted him up. Watching Hanzo try to get Gon to admit defeat through words, Ush shook his head again. Great, he thought. This farce is going to go on for hours. I should have brought snacks and a drink. I wonder if I can still ask someone to bring me some. Just say it already. Admit defeat. Never. Chapter 78. Looking at Gon, who still refused to admit defeat, Ush lightly shook his head. Then, raising a hand, he casually waved to one of the nearby staff. I need a glass of ice. Right away. The staff member, coincidentally, the one who had been assigned to monitor Ush during the 4th test, rushed off to fetch it without hesitation. Clack. He really brought it? Ush blinked, slightly surprised, then nodded in satisfaction. Not bad. At least I won't be parched while this drags on. Just as Ush turned his attention back to the match, he noticed many candidates glaring at him. What's with those looks? Ush asked, confused. Ush, how could you ask for ice at a time like this? Leorio shouted, frustrated. If I'm thirsty, it's a perfectly reasonable request, Ush replied with a shrug. Gon's over there getting beat up, and you're sipping cold drinks like it's a picnic, Leorio snapped. Huh. Are we supposed to be that close? Well, other people's suffering paired with my own comfort really doesn't look great. Alright, Ush lifted his chin toward the arena. Gon. Just admit defeat already. You still have the next match, stay in shape and win that one instead. That's right, Gon. Hurry up and give in, we'll try again next time, Leorio added, following up with his own shout. But Gon only smiled weakly and said, It's okay, Leorio. And Ush? I'm not going to give up. Smack. Hanzo struck Gon on the head with the side of his hand, not to cause serious harm, but enough to shake his brain. Despite that, Gon didn't cry out. He endured the nausea and dizziness, his face a mix of pain and stubbornness, saliva and snot trailing from his chin. I think we better stop talking, Ush commented, glancing at Gon. The more we say, the more he's going to suffer. You bastard. Leorio gritted his teeth and glared daggers at Hanzo, shaking with helpless fury. Ush, meanwhile, sighed. He really did want Gon to throw in the towel. Not out of concern, but because it meant they could get on with the test already. But knowing Gon's personality, Ush was sure he wouldn't concede so easily. This kind of stubbornness didn't sit right with Ush. If he ever became friends with someone like Gon, he'd probably get dragged into all sorts of reckless situations. That's how people like Kite ended up dying, wasn't it? If Gon hadn't refused to back off, Kite might have survived. He could have escaped Neferpito, especially since the Queen's royal guards weren't that far from the nest yet. So, for the next few hours, Ush was stuck watching a painfully one-sided interrogation match. He didn't really want to watch, but he wasn't allowed to leave either. In the meantime, he focused his attention elsewhere, using his palm to manipulate his Nen membrane. Mimicking the motions of Hanzo and Gon, he silently trained his Nen control in the background. No one noticed this little training session, except one person. Nitro, sitting silently with the examiners, cast a brief glance toward Ush. Then, smiling to himself, he said nothing. Ush, who caught that glance, smirked quietly. 3 long hours passed. And Gon never gave up. Even Ush was impressed. Watching this in the anime was one thing, but witnessing it play out in real time had a completely different impact. For 3 hours straight, Gon held out without admitting defeat. He wouldn't have lasted under physical torture, his mind was simply that resolute. If not for his reckless tendencies and emotional extremes, he'd make a fantastic ally. But Ush had too much at stake to risk being tied to someone like that. He had a family, a future, a loved one waiting for him. Gon's circle, on the other hand? Kurapika was a loner. Leorio had no close ties. Killua had family, but they were literal assassins. Nobody around Gon had anyone they needed to protect. Except Gon himself, maybe. His aunt, Wei Liland. Still, even then, his father was Gene Freaks, one of the 5 strongest nen users in the world. To even be considered friends with Gon, you either needed overwhelming strength, or absolutely no one who could be dragged down with you. And Ush had neither luxury. Boom. At that moment, Hanzo, clearly at his wit's end, tried to convince Gon one last time by explaining the consequences of his continued resistance. Instead, Gon kicked him square in the face, sending Hanzo staggering back. Chapter 79. Snap. Ush calmed his aura membrane, then stood up from the ground. After seeing Gon kick Hanzo into the air, Ush knew the farce was over. Because Hanzo no longer had any way to deal with Gon. He had tried so many interrogation methods and even broke Gon's left arm, yet he still couldn't see a trace of fear or negativity in Gon's eyes. That kind of stubbornness, something Hanzo thought impossible, had actually appeared right in front of him. In the end, Hanzo wanted to keep trying, but he fell right into Gon's rhythm within just a few exchanges. Hanzo gave up. He no longer wanted to tangle with Gon. 3 hours wasted, and still no result. Seeing this, Ush couldn't help but feel relieved. Thank goodness it wasn't me in that match. Stretching casually, Ush began warming up for his round. On the other side, Gon, dissatisfied with winning because his opponent forfeited, came up with the bright idea of trying to win happily in another way. This kind of thinking completely pissed Hanzo off, and he clocked Gon squarely in the head. Idiot. I forfeit. Please begin the second round. Although, if that guy wakes up, he definitely won't accept it. What happens then? Hanzo turned toward the examiners and asked Nitro. Anyone who's qualified is qualified. Whether they accept it or not doesn't matter, Nitro replied calmly. Good to know. Hanzo nodded, then returned to stand by the wall. The second match, Ush vs Kurapika. Please step forward, the referee announced without delay. Shaking his head, Ush walked to the center of the hall and stood face to face with Kurapika. The two said nothing, just locked eyes. Begin. The referee called. Immediately, Kurapika pulled out 2 wooden training swords from behind him and took a ready stance. Ush didn't move. He simply looked at Kurapika and said, "You know you're not going to win. Why not just admit defeat?" "I can't. I need a hunter license," Kurapika replied, eyes full of resolve. Hearing that, Ush knew winning without a fight was off the table. Without further words, he rushed toward Kurapika and engaged. Slower than usual? Sitting off to the side, Hisaku narrowed his eyes. The speed Ush was using now seemed off compared to when they fought, and strangely enough, it looked like this was Ush's top speed. Ush, of course, was unaware of Hisaku's suspicions, and wouldn't care even if he knew. He wasn't the type to explain his abilities to others. Would this match be even? Absolutely not. Even with Ush's current relatively weak physical foundation and his current fruit ability being spiritual exercise, the outcome was inevitable. Kurapika lacked something essential, something that connected him to the deeper truths of this world. Even if Ush didn't use his distance ability and just stood there, Kurapika's attacks wouldn't break through his defenses. Entanglement was just too strong for average combatants. Even Killua, with his 16-ton strength, could barely inflict pain on a novice user of entanglement, not real damage. And Kurapika, while knowledgeable and skilled, lacked raw physical power. Right now, He barely had 4 tons of strength, about the same as Ush. Under these conditions, the outcome was clear. If killing were allowed, Kurapika would have already lost. But since this was a duel where you had to make your opponent surrender. Slam. Just 5 seconds into the match, the tide turned completely. Kurapika couldn't land a hit. Ush, meanwhile, had no trouble hitting him. Even without activating practice, or Ken, Ush's entangled punches were too much. Thankfully, Ush held back, otherwise one hit would have broken Kurapika's forearm. Now, as Kurapika staggered from the pain, Ush moved behind him, twisted his arm behind his back, and forced him down to the floor. Admit defeat, Ush said, holding both of Kurapika's wrists in one hand and pinning him down with a knee on his back. Kurapika didn't respond immediately. He was thinking, looking for a way out. He would admit defeat, just not easily. Ush could tell. But he also knew how to make Kurapika surrender. That's what made this match so much better than Gon's. Ush suddenly lowered his head and whispered next to Kurapika's ear. Admit defeat, and I'll give you intel on the spiders. Kurapika frowns. His breathing halted. His eyes turned crimson in an instant. Thump, thump, thump. Kurapika's heart pounded rapidly. Seconds passed. I admit defeat, Kurapika said at last. What? Kurapika, why? Why did you give up all of a sudden? Leorio shouted, clearly unable to process what just happened. Chapter 80. Snap. Ush calmed his aura membrane, then stood up from the ground. After seeing Gon kick Hanzo into the air, Ush knew this farce was finally over. Because Hanzo had no way of dealing with Gon. He'd already tried numerous interrogation methods and had even broken Gon's left arm, yet he couldn't see a trace of negativity in the boy's eyes. It was sheer stubbornness. Something Hanzo considered impossible had actually happened right in front of him. In the end, Hanzo tried to push harder, only to fall into Gon's rhythm after a few exchanges. Hanzo gave up. He no longer wanted to waste time. 3 hours lost, and still no results. Ush couldn't help but feel relieved. Thank goodness it wasn't his match. Stretching his limbs, Ush waited for his turn. Meanwhile, Gon, who didn't want to win like this, tried to think of a way to make the victory feel more justified. That thought alone nearly drove Hanzo crazy. He punched Gon with frustration. You're just stupid. I admit defeat. Please start the second round. But if that guy wakes up, he's definitely not going to accept it. What do we do then? Hanzo turned to look toward the examiners and asked Nitro. Anyone who's qualified is qualified. Whether they accept it or not doesn't matter, Nitro replied calmly. That's good, then Hanzo nodded and returned to the wall. Then, for the second round, Ush and Kurapika, please step forward. The referee didn't waste any time. Ush shook his head and walked to the center of the hall, standing face to face with Kurapika. The two didn't speak, simply staring each other down. Begin. The referee called. They moved at once. Kurapika pulled out 2 wooden practice swords from behind his back and took a stance. Ush, on the other hand, didn't move. He looked calmly at Kurapika and said, you know you're no match for me. So how about giving up now? No way. I need that hunter license, Kurapika said firmly. Hearing that, Ush knew his hope for a win without fighting was gone. Without another word, he dashed toward Kurapika. Swoosh. Slower than before? Hisaka, who was observing, raised an eyebrow in confusion. This wasn't the same speed Ush had shown when they fought. Was this really his full power? Ush didn't care what others thought. He wasn't the type to explain himself. And a match against Kurapika wouldn't be close. Not even if Ush held back. Even with his weaker physical foundation and spiritual training fruit active, Kurapika couldn't land a hit, let alone break through Ush's defenses. If this duel allowed lethal force, Kurapika would already be dead. But since it didn't, Ush had to make him surrender. Slam. In less than 5 seconds, the fight tilted completely in Ush's favor. Kurapika couldn't even touch him, while Ush's blows, light and controlled, landed easily. Even without entering Gyo or Ken, Ush's aura-wrapped punches were too much for Kurapika to defend against. Thankfully, Ush held back. Otherwise, Kurapika's forearm would have snapped after one blow. Kurapika winced in pain. Ush moved behind him in a blur, twisted his arm behind his back, and slammed him to the ground. "Give up," Ush said, holding both of Kurapika's wrists with one hand while pressing his knee into Kurapika's spine to keep him pinned. Kurapika didn't answer immediately. He was trying to think of a way out. He didn't want to give in so easily. Seeing this, Ush lowered his head slightly and whispered into Kurapika's ear. "If you surrender, I'll tell you something about the spiders." The moment the words were spoken, Kurapika froze. His heartbeat spiked. His eyes turned a deep scarlet. A few seconds later, "I admit defeat," Kurapika said quietly. "What? Kurapika, why did you give up all of a sudden?" Leorio shouted, clearly stunned. Chapter 81. "First of all, congratulations on becoming hunters," said the bean-faced man cheerfully to the examinees. "Objection. Objection." At that moment, Leorio and Kurapika raised their hands in unison and shouted. Their sudden outburst interrupted the bean-faced man's attempt to continue. Looking at Kurapika and Leorio, he seemed helpless. "What's the matter?" the bean-faced man asked, forced to pause. Kurapika replied seriously, "We believe that Killua's behavior during the exam was out of character. What he did wasn't of his own will, and we don't think it's fair to deem him unqualified." "Yes, I agree," Leorio added firmly. The bean-faced man seemed eager to persuade them otherwise, but he was cut off by Chairman Netaro. Netaro pushed the bean-faced man aside and walked up to the podium, facing Ush and the rest of the group. Boom. Just as Netaro was about to speak, the back door of the conference room slammed open. Everyone turned to see Gon, his left arm in a cast, walking in from outside. Gon's expression was dead serious. Without saying a word, he passed a stunned Ush and walked straight up to Illumi. "Ugh, can't I just get my hunter license and leave already?" Ush muttered, resting his cheek on one hand while watching Gon with mild annoyance. "Lectures again? What's the point? Just print a manual and let us read it ourselves." "So over it. You apologize to Killua," Gon said to Illumi, his face deadly serious. "Why should I?" Illumi asked, clearly confused. "You don't even know why I should apologize?" Gon stared at him with cold resolve. "You're not qualified to be a big brother." "Huh? I need qualifications to be a brother now?" Illumi responded, bewildered. But strangely enough, Ush found himself agreeing with Gon. "Sure, when everything's normal, being a brother doesn't require qualifications. But if an older sibling oppresses and manipulates their younger sibling, then yeah, they've forfeited that right." Suddenly, Gon grabbed Illumi by the wrist and yanked, throwing him clean across the room. "What the hell? Where did that burst of strength come from?" Ush, who had been completely disinterested, now stared wide-eyed at Gon. But upon closer inspection, Gon didn't seem any different than usual. If Ush hadn't been so sure of what he'd just felt, he might have thought he was imagining things. Because just now, he definitely sensed a violent surge of aura from Gon. In that split second, Gon's attack was stronger than Illumi's aura-wrapped Ren. Gon glared at Illumi and shouted, "You don't need qualifications to be a friend." Again. Gon always seems to unlock some hidden potential when he's angry. It doesn't last long, but it's real. Incredible. If he could develop an ability fueled by rage, he'd be unstoppable from the get-go. Is this guy even human? Maybe he's like Killua's sibling, Aluka, and her other self, Nanika. Honestly, the odds aren't low. To this day, the manga never confirmed who Gon's mother is. Some fans think she died. Others think Jing used a pregnancy stone on Greed Island to create Gon. Still others believe Gon hails from the Dark Continent and isn't even Jing's biological son. There's even a theory that Gon's mother is a creature from the Dark Continent. She gave birth to Gon with Jing and was then taken back to that mysterious place. Which would explain why Jing is so obsessed with going there. Ush used to think that was just some crazy fan theory. After all, Jing always seemed like a reckless guy who loved exploring ruins and protecting them afterward. But now, Ush found himself more willing to believe that Jing had awakened some ancient being in a ruin, had a fling with it, and that's how Gon came to be. And for some reason, that being had to return to the Dark Continent. Why does Ush think so? Because this is a shonen manga written by a Japanese mangaka. And in shonen stories, especially the popular ones, the protagonist always seems to have some epic hidden origin. Their background is bigger than the whole world. Take One Piece. Luffy's grandfather is a marine hero, his dad leads the Revolutionary Army, his mentor is the right hand of the Pirate King, and his sworn brother is Ace, the Pirate King's son. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Luffy's mom turned out to be him, the boss of the Celestial Dragons. Or in Naruto, his dad was the fourth Hokage, his mom was a Jinchuriki, his teacher was a Sannin, and he's literally the reincarnation of Asura. And then they call it the rise of a small underdog? Please. It's basically a family drama. So really, how could Gon be any different? Ush sighed. These so-called small-time underdog stories always end up being about some rich kid inheriting a crazy legacy. Back in the present, Illumi asked calmly, "And what do you plan to do if you see him?" "Of course I'm going to bring Killua back," Gon answered, as if it were obvious. Illumi was starting to see Gon as a threat, in every sense of the word. "You say that like we kidnapped Killua," Illumi said flatly. "But he left of his own accord." "But if he was manipulated, that's no different from kidnapping," Gon replied furiously. Smack. At that moment, Ush had had enough. He raised both hands and clapped them loudly, grabbing everyone's attention. "Okay, enough," Ush snapped. "I don't care if Killua is qualified, I don't care if you two brats want to be besties, and I definitely don't care about this big brother drama. I just want my license and to go home already. Got it? Thank you." Chapter 82. Realizing that this argument was going nowhere, Ush forcefully cut in, interrupting the heated exchange between Gon and Illumi, as well as anything Kurapika and Leorio were about to say. "Killua being disqualified is already a done deal, and yet you're planning to hand your qualifications over to someone who was already eliminated? Very impressive. Are you mocking the rest of us? Mocking those of us who fought tooth and nail for our hunter licenses? If you actually succeed, then what was the point of everything we went through? Do the candidates who died trying to become hunters deserve that fate? Is this hunter exam just a joke now? Has the Hunter Association turned into an amusement park? And what about Badoro, who didn't even need to die? Was his death just a whatever?" Ush said all this in a calm, mocking tone, but every word struck a chord. The rest didn't matter as much, but what really infuriated Ush was how the hunter license, something he had worked so hard for, was now being treated by others as something they could just give up on a whim. It wasn't just offensive, it was deeply insulting. If something isn't important to you, then sure, throw it away if you want. But when something feels essential to you, and others treat it like trash, it hits differently. Even though Ush didn't care so much about the title itself, but more about the freedom and spiritual satisfaction that came with having the license, this kind of behavior was enough to tick him off. Ush's words silenced many in the room, especially the other candidates present. Because, frankly, he was right. The license they had all bled and suffered for was now being treated like it could be tossed aside on a whim. If Gon and the others succeeded in reinstating Killua, it would feel like a slap in the face. Even Leorio found himself speechless. He could no longer maintain the conviction that Killua deserved a pass. Gon said in a low voice, "That kind of stuff doesn't matter. No one else has the right to judge someone's qualifications. If you're not satisfied with your own license, then just work harder until you are. Killua can always take the exam again, This time, it was just bad luck. Gon, could you shut up for a second? Ush cut him off. Gon, who had been about to confront Illumi again, turned his head, confused by the interruption. I remember you said you were 12 years old, Ush said, eyeing him. Gon nodded. Yeah, Killua and I are both 12. Then your elders should have taught you a thing or two about manners, Ush said with narrowed eyes. Ush, what the hell do you mean? Leorio shouted angrily. Hold on. Let me finish talking to Gon, Ush said calmly, raising a hand. You. Leorio looked ready to explode. Leorio, calm down. Let's hear him out, Kurapika said, trying to keep the peace. Ignoring Leorio's glare, Ush continued looking at Gon. Gon nodded. Aunt Mito taught me. Oh, so she did teach you. Ush put on a theatrically shocked expression. Then why did you barge in here, slam open the door, and interrupt someone else's lecture? Do you think your friendship drama with Killua is the only thing that matters here? I didn't mean to. Gon waved his hands, flustered. I was just so angry. Then he bowed to everyone present and shouted, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have interrupted your lecture. Now that's the enhancer type for you. Straightforward to the core, even at 12 years old. Meanwhile, Ush found himself thinking back to when he was 12 in his past life. Let's see. Climbing trees to steal eggs, fishing in rivers, scaring girls with bugs, sneaking over to his cousin's place to take apart electronics. Yeesh. Kids like him were total brats. The fact he didn't die young? Honestly, miraculous. Ahem. Alright then, owning up to your mistakes is a good sign. You're still a good kid, Ush said, clearing his throat. Since you're so set on finding Killua, let me give you a suggestion. When you can beat Illumi to the ground, then, not only can you be Killua's friend, heck, you could even marry Killua if you wanted. Wait, what the hell kind of logic is that? Be friends, sure, but what's this about marriage? The others in the room were clearly baffled by Ush's bizarre advice. But Gon seemed to understand what he really meant. Of course, Gon didn't hear the part about marriage, he only heard the challenge, beat Illumi. It was all about strength. That's what he lacked. Gon understood that much. Thanks for the advice, Ush. I get it now, Gon said with a firm nod. Then he bowed toward the examiners and said, sorry. Please continue the lecture. Honestly, Gon might be impulsive, but he wasn't a bad kid. Ush couldn't help but reflect. At 12, he wasn't even close to being like Gon. Man, thank goodness I was born in a peaceful country in my last life. If he had grown up somewhere war-torn, with how wild he used to be, he probably would have run straight into a combat zone with his buddies and never come back. And then, naturally, his family would end up having to host a memorial dinner. The lecture begins. The bean-faced man stepped forward and smiled. Now, let me give you a detailed introduction to the hunter license. His explanation was concise and efficient, no unnecessary fluff. He explained the function of the hunter ID card. With it, the holder can enter 90 countries with restricted entry, as well as access 75 classified zones. They can use 95% of public facilities around the world and are eligible for financing from first-class enterprises. If sold directly, it could provide enough wealth to live worry-free for 7 lifetimes. However, candidates are warned to safeguard their license, as the Hunter Association will not reissue lost cards. According to the association's data, 1 in every 5 hunters loses their ID card within a year. Therefore, the first true test of becoming a hunter is being able to protect your license. Chapter 83. Although the hunter license was undoubtedly useful to Ush, that was about it. The right to enter restricted zones, access to countries that bar outsiders. For Ush, that meant nothing. If he wanted to go somewhere, there were very few people in this world who could actually stop him. Why pretend otherwise? Of course, that was only because Ush was aware of the strange abilities scattered throughout the world. Like Killua's sibling, Nanika. The existence of the hunter license, for Ush, might only serve as a name tag to enter a forbidden zone legally. Selling it for money? Out of the question. Ush wasn't even sure whether he'd ever need the license in the future. After explaining the practical uses of the hunter license, the bean-faced man began laying out the hunter code, often referred to as the 10 rules of a hunter. A hunter must have a clear target to pursue. A hunter must possess at least basic combat ability. The minimum requirement is the mastery of the 18 basic meditation techniques. A hunter's license is never voided, nor can it be reissued under any circumstances. Hunters may not treat other hunters as prey. However, this protection does not apply to hunters who commit heinous crimes. Hunters who achieve significant contributions in a particular field will be awarded 1 star. Senior hunters who have earned 1 star and successfully train a junior hunter who also earns a star will be awarded 2 stars. A hunter who meets the above criteria and achieves remarkable feats in multiple fields will be awarded 3 stars. The head of the Hunter Association must have a minimum level of trust to assume the position. This is defined as gaining over 50% approval. If the chairman's seat becomes vacant, a new chairman must be elected immediately. In the interim, authority transfers to the vice chairman. The chairman decides how new members are selected. However, if there is a significant change in selection methods, it must be approved by more than half of the association. Any matters not currently documented shall be decided by a vote involving the chairman, vice chairman, and the staff committee, whose members are chosen by the chairman. When you step out of this room, you will officially be hunters, Netero said as he stood before the candidates. We are companions and rivals alike. No matter what lies ahead, I wish you all the best. Disband. It was finally over. After half an hour of listening to regulations and procedures, Ush let out a long sigh of relief. Time to go home. Ignoring the other candidates saying their goodbyes, Ush quietly made his way outside. He wasn't trying to be rude, he just didn't care. But before he could get away, Gon spotted him. Ush? Goodbye, and thank you. Gon called out loudly. The shout was so loud that pretending not to hear it was impossible. Ush paused briefly, then gave a sideways wave. Goodbye. With that, he turned and headed toward the hotel's exit. What now? Ush muttered when he found Hisoka waiting in front of him. Hisoka smiled and pulled out a small pamphlet. You'll probably need this. Ush glanced down at the booklet. It had no title, no logo, completely blank. What is it? He asked. Something you'll need to start training. Right now, Hisoka said with a smirk. Ush hesitated. Then he remembered the prophetic poem that Neon Nostrade had written for him before the exam. In the spotlight, you will get what you deserve. But it's better not to trust the clown. The warning was clear, don't trust the clown. And the only person around who fit that description was Hisoka. Ush had taken that prophecy lightly before. But now, he wasn't so sure. He glanced once more at the pamphlet in Hisoka's hand. Seconds passed. Then Ush shook his head. I'll figure it out on my own. Without another word, he walked straight out of the hotel. Outside, Ush looked up at the sky, watching as an airship soared off in the distance. He stood there for a moment, lost in thought. Then he shook his head and began walking toward the nearby airport. He'd abandoned the idea of calling for an airship, too much hassle. Buy a ticket. Board the plane. Done. And just like that, a few days later, Ush returned to York New City. It had been a long time. The place where he'd lived and grown for over 10 years. Standing at the airport exit, Ush couldn't help but feel a twinge of nostalgia. Gathering himself, he stepped out into the crowd. He ignored the swarm of men and women trying to lure guests and dove straight into the city traffic. York New City. A hub for mafia families and a breeding ground for all things shady, legal or not. If you thought that taxi drivers here were just offering rides into the city, you'd be dead wrong. Most of the drivers had diverse backgrounds. Some would lure tourists straight into sleazy hotels, and they made a nice commission of doing it. Sure, they made money off both ends, but that was just the beginning. Many ran side hustles from inside their vehicles. From selling snacks and bottled water to more illicit goods like white powder, or even offering physical services for the right price. Sometimes the cars were moving, sometimes they weren't. Either way, everybody was driving. Driving small cars, driving big business, it was all just a matter of taste. The level of chaos here wasn't quite as infamous as Meteor City. But it was close. So what was the difference? In Ush's opinion, the only real difference was that York New looked cleaner than Meteor City. But even Meteor City had its clean areas, especially the districts where the wealthy lived. Those places were pristine, a display of wealth and class. The so-called rich zones. Chapter 84. Just as Ush was about to take a few steps toward home, a voice called out from the side, full of surprise. "Master Ush, you're back." A young man with hair dyed in red, yellow, and blue came running over excitedly. Ush turned to look at him. After a moment of thought, he realized he had no memory of this guy. Expressionless, Ush asked, "And you are?" "Young Master Ush, my name is Mihara. I work under the boss of the Meteorite Gang. I've seen you with Dog and Rat Boss from the Baldhead Gang before," Mihara explained, practically vibrating with excitement. Ush followed Mihara's words, thought for a moment, and then nodded in recognition. Right, this guy was one of the younger members who used to follow his uncle around. "Young Master Ush, you don't have a car yet, right? Why not ride in my father's car? It's very steady," Mihara offered eagerly, eyes bright with anticipation. He knew how powerful Ush was. If he could just get a moment to show his face and be helpful, his standing in the Meteorite Gang might get a nice little boost. But Ush glanced at Mihara's expectant expression, shook his head, and said flatly, "Too slow." Not slow at all," Mihara insisted. "My father's known for being one of the fastest on the road. He'll get you home in no time." "All right, that's enough," Ush said with a wave, cutting off the sales pitch. And just as Mihara opened his mouth to keep going, whoosh! Ush vanished, disappearing right in front of Mihara's eyes. This. Mihara stood frozen, staring at the now empty spot. If he didn't know for a fact that Ush was a real person, and his boss's nephew, no less, he would have thought he'd just seen a ghost in broad daylight. 1 second he was there, the next, gone. Before, Ush had only ever sprinted short distances. But now? Mihara couldn't even catch a glimpse of him within several hundred meters. He's way too strong. With a nephew like that, Dog and Rat Boss doesn't need to worry about the Meteorite Gang's future at all. No more wasting time. I've got to climb to the top of the Meteorite Gang, Mihara muttered to himself, pumped full of ambition. Unbeknownst to him, his brief encounter had lit a fire inside him. If Ush had known, he would have simply smirked and said he'd just helped his uncle make a new general. Back in York New City, Ush used his high-speed movement technique freely. He hadn't even tested this kind of control during the Hunter exam. Soon, he arrived at his family's hotel. Business was still booming, and the house next door was still under renovation. Ush went to check on the progress, and came away sighing. At this rate, there's no way it'll be done in a few months. Tough luck. He'd thought he could recoup some money soon, but clearly, that wasn't happening. If things kept going like this, he really might not be able to cover his school tuition. Could he rely on the big auction event in York New City to make the money? Sure, but that wasn't until August, and there were still 7 months to go. Live frugally until then? Possible, but not ideal. Looks like I'll need to head to Heaven's Arena soon, Ush muttered. Winter break starts in a week. Perfect time to go earn some money. Even though he'd passed the Hunter exam, and then training for new hunters was supposedly coming soon, there was no telling exactly when that would start. As he walked back to the hotel from the construction site, Ush was still thinking about when his mentor might show up. "Hey, Ush? When did you get back?" Bessie, the front desk receptionist, shouted in surprise as Ush walked through the hotel doors. "Yo, Sister Bessie. I just got back," Ush said with a casual smile. "By the way, where are my parents?" "The boss and madam went to check out some building materials for the renovation. I heard you went to take the hunter exam. How did it go?" she asked, hesitating slightly at the end. Bessie didn't want to risk making him feel bad, just in case he'd failed. But Ush could tell what she was worried about. "Check this out." Ush grinned and pulled out his hunter license, waving it in front of her. "Ush, you passed?" Bessie's eyes widened. "That's amazing. You went so far just to take the exam and passed on the first try? You're incredible." Ush waved a hand dismissively. "It wasn't that hard." He then casually placed the license down on the front desk. "What's this?" Bessie asked, eyeing the license with visible interest. Ush tapped it with a finger. "Aren't you curious? Go ahead, pick it up and take a look." "Really?" Bessie gasped, her eyes locked onto the card like it was a sacred artifact. For ordinary people, a hunter license was like holding a gold mine. Even if it wasn't theirs, just touching one was an experience few could boast about. For Bessie, this moment felt like something she could brag about for the rest of her life. "Of course," Ush said with a shrug. "Thank you, Ush. I love you to death," Bessie squealed excitedly. Before the words even finished leaving her mouth, she had already snatched the license off the counter. Holding it carefully in both hands, she studied every inch of it. Then she pulled out her phone and handed it to Ush. "Ush, take a picture for me." "Sure," Ush said, taking the phone without hesitation. He snapped a few photos of Bessie proudly posing with the license. Afterward, she looked at the photos and beamed. "Thank you, Ush. Seriously, thank you." Chapter 85. After chatting a bit more with Bessie, the two parted ways. Back in his room, Ush found everything clean and tidy. Clearly, someone had been keeping it that way every day. "Let's wait until winter break. If no one shows up to teach me by then, I'll head straight to Heaven's Arena." Time passed quickly, and soon dusk settled over the city. It was around this time that Ush's parents finally returned. Naturally, they were overjoyed to see him again. Especially after hearing that Ush had officially become a hunter, the pride on their faces was indescribable. Of course, the joy only lasted a moment. Before long, Ush was buried in his studies again, and his parents were off once more, checking materials for the renovation project. The next day, Ush went to school. Nyeon was furious that he'd come back to Yorknew without calling her the day before. But luckily, she wasn't the type to stay mad forever. She quickly became distracted by Ush's hunter license and was coaxed into full excitement as he shared stories from the hunter exam. Time flew by, and before they knew it, 2 peaceful days had passed. Still, there was no sign of the Nen instructor Ush was expecting. And just when he was seriously considering heading to Heaven's Arena to find Wing, around noon that day, a white dove flew down in front of him, carrying a small box of discs. It was such a bizarre sight that Ush normally wouldn't have bothered with it. But his sharp eyes caught something on the disc case, a picture of Netero. Now that was unexpected. Curious, Ush picked it up and went to find a player so he could view it. As soon as Netero's image appeared on the screen, Ush was sure, this was the chairman's doing. "Yo, Ush boy. I'm guessing you know by now that the hunter exam isn't quite over yet," Netero said on screen, smiling cheerfully. "I tried to find you a good mentor, but, well, everyone turned me down. So, I'll teach you myself. From what I've seen, your fundamentals are solid. What you're lacking is refinement and control. So, that's what this lesson will focus on. I'm a busy guy, though, so this will be taught via video. If it doesn't stick the first time, watch it again." Netero's tone was casual, but Ush could sense the message between the lines. No one wanted to teach him in person. Or more accurately, there simply weren't many people qualified to be his teacher. Netero had reached out to a few candidates, but each declined for their own reasons. Ush frowned briefly, then relaxed. In fact, This situation worked out in his favor. If he could learn Nen refinement through video, there was no need to deal with a real-life teacher at all. All he needed now was reference data. Satisfied with that, Ush turned his full attention to the screen. The information wasn't overly long, but the complexity came in the application. For example, Ush had previously assumed that Nen body refinement required a specific, universal ratio of aura flow to muscle. But according to Netero's explanation, that idea was too simplistic. Yes, Nen body refinement does require a ratio. But each individual muscle and bone has its own optimal ratio. In other words, as the aura spirals through the body to aid in refining, each muscle needs a different amount. And that's still not all. It turns out, each muscle doesn't just have one ideal ratio, it could have 2, or 5, depending on different states of activity. The data is extraordinarily complex. To achieve maximum efficiency, the aura ratio needs to be adjusted at a consistent frequency throughout the body. However, most Nen users don't bother with this second stage of refinement. Why? Because it requires insane levels of precision, memory, and control over one's aura. Only a tiny number of Nen users even attempt it. According to Netero, only Jing has ever truly mastered the second stage. That's one reason why his power continues to skyrocket. Even the first stage ratios are difficult, very few people can memorize them all. Most Nen users settle for focusing on just a few main muscle groups to refine, reducing the complexity but also the effectiveness. These users tend to rank on the lower end of the strength scale. What a pain in the ass. But this kind of thing isn't hard for me, Ush muttered once the video ended. No wonder I wasn't getting stronger before, I was walking down the wrong path. With that, Ush shut off the player and got to work. He didn't dive straight into the second stage yet. First, he wanted to get a better grip on stage 1. Even though Nen body refinement can be done sitting still, it's more effective when paired with physical activity. So Ush started moving around his room, allowing his aura to cycle through his body as he exercised. Each time he focused on a new muscle group, he adjusted the flow of aura according to the ratios Netero had outlined. 1 round. 2 rounds. Half an hour passed. Click. Suddenly, the disc player made a noise. And right before Ush's eyes, something strange happened. A shape, an aura form, emerged from the machine. Chapter 86. After chatting a bit more with Bessie, the two parted ways. Back in his room, Ush found everything clean and tidy. Clearly, someone had been keeping it that way every day. Let's wait until winter break. If no one shows up to teach me by then, I'll head straight to Heaven's Arena. Time passed quickly, and soon dusk settled over the city. It was around this time that Ush's parents finally returned. Naturally, they were overjoyed to see him again. Especially after hearing that Ush had officially become a hunter, the pride on their faces was indescribable. Of course, the joy only lasted a moment. Before long, Ush was buried in his studies again, and his parents were off once more, checking materials for the renovation project. The next day, Ush went to school. Nyeon was furious that he'd come back to Yorknu without calling her the day before. But luckily, she wasn't the type to stay mad forever. She quickly became distracted by Ush's hunter license and was coaxed into full excitement as he shared stories from the hunter exam. Time flew by, and before they knew it, 2 peaceful days had passed. Still, there was no sign of the Nen instructor Ush was expecting. And just when he was seriously considering heading to Heaven's Arena to find Wing, around noon that day, a white dove flew down in front of him, carrying a small box of discs. It was such a bizarre sight that Ush normally wouldn't have bothered with it. But his sharp eyes caught something on the disc case, a picture of Netero. Now that was unexpected. Curious, Ush picked it up and went to find a player so he could view it. As soon as Netero's image appeared on the screen, Ush was sure, this was the chairman's doing. Yo, Ush boy. I'm guessing you know by now that the hunter exam isn't quite over yet, Netero said on screen, smiling cheerfully. I tried to find you a good mentor, But, well, everyone turned me down. So, I'll teach you myself. From what I've seen, your fundamentals are solid. What you're lacking is refinement and control. So, that's what this lesson will focus on. I'm a busy guy, though, so this will be taught via video. If it doesn't stick the first time, watch it again. Netero's tone was casual, but Ush could sense the message between the lines. No one wanted to teach him in person. Or more accurately, there simply weren't many people qualified to be his teacher. Netero had reached out to a few candidates, but each declined for their own reasons. Ush frowned briefly, then relaxed. In fact, this situation worked out in his favor. If he could learn refinement through video, there was no need to deal with a real-life teacher at all. All he needed now was reference data. Satisfied with that, Ush turned his full attention to the screen. The information wasn't overly long, but the complexity came in the application. For example, Ush had previously assumed that body refinement required a specific, universal ratio of aura flow to muscle. But according to Netero's explanation, that idea was too simplistic. Yes, body refinement does require a ratio. But each individual muscle and bone has its own optimal ratio. In other words, as the aura spirals through the body to aid in refining, each muscle needs a different amount. And that's still not all. It turns out, each muscle doesn't just have one ideal ratio, it could have 2, or 5, depending on different states of activity. The data is extraordinarily complex. To achieve maximum efficiency, the aura ratio needs to be adjusted at a consistent frequency throughout the body. However, most users don't bother with this second stage of refinement. Why? Because it requires insane levels of precision, memory, and control over one's aura. Only a tiny number of users even attempt it. According to Netero, only Jing has ever truly mastered the second stage. That's one reason why his power continues to skyrocket. Even the first stage ratios are difficult, very few people can memorize them all. Most users settle for focusing on just a few main muscle groups to refine, reducing the complexity but also the effectiveness. These users tend to rank on the lower end of the strength scale. What a pain in the ass. But this kind of thing isn't hard for me, Ush muttered once the video ended. No wonder I wasn't getting stronger before, I was walking down the wrong path. With that, Ush shut off the player and got to work. He didn't dive straight into the second stage yet. First, he wanted to get a better grip on stage 1. Even though body refinement can be done sitting still, it's more effective when paired with physical activity. So Ush started moving around his room, allowing his aura to cycle through his body as he exercised. Each time he focused on a new muscle group, he adjusted the flow of aura according to the ratios Netero had outlined. 1 round. 2 rounds. Half an hour passed. Click. Suddenly, the disc player made a noise. And right before Ush's eyes, something strange happened. A shape, an aura form, emerged from the machine. Chapter 87. At the Meteorite Gang's headquarters, Ush's brother-in-law, the Grey Rat, was gathered around a table with a group of his most loyal men, discussing their next move after the Green Snake Gang's surprise raid the previous night. Everyone's expression was grim. Clearly, morale was low. It wasn't about giving up or losing heart, it was because the reality of their situation was too obvious to ignore. They'd fought members of the Green Snake Gang last night. And they'd gotten absolutely wrecked. The beatdown was so bad, it had them wondering if the enemy had taken some kind of experimental combat drug. Even if they had, it didn't matter. That was still their edge. This wasn't a sporting match, it was gang warfare. There was no such thing as fair. "Boss, maybe we should ask your nephew for help," one of the subordinates suggested. The Grey Rat didn't want to outright reject the idea, so he hesitated and then muttered, 1, 2, 3, no. Ush has his own stuff going on, we'll handle this ourselves. But boss, those guys are monsters. How are we supposed to deal with them? Yeah. They're insanely strong, and they don't even flinch when we hit them. It takes dozens of shots to put one of them down. What are we supposed to do? One of them took 3 bullets to the head before finally dropping. Boss, we're not scared of dying. If they were just regular guys, we'd fight till the end. But this... They were right. The Grey Rat had seen it for himself. The Green Snake Gang looked human on the outside, but their bodies were inhumanly durable. His guys' knives had bounced off like they were slashing reinforced rubber. Even bullets were barely effective. It took entire clips to bring someone down. If the Grey Rat hadn't pulled the plug and abandoned those contested areas when he did, the Meteorite Gang might have been wiped out overnight. He was still hesitating, unsure what choice to make. Then, one of his most trusted friends, the Blue Rat, leaned in and said, "Even if we don't ask Ush to help us fight, maybe we can just ask him what those guys are. Honestly, the way they fought reminds me of Red Snake's guys before he died." "Yeah, boss, it wouldn't hurt to get some intel. We need to know what we're up against." Everyone in the room agreed. Even the Grey Rat felt the same. He needed to know what was going on with those freaks in the Green Snake Gang. Finally, he nodded. "All right. Let's go ask Ush." Without delay, the Grey Rat and Blue Rat made their way to Ush's family hotel, escorted by a few underlings. As they approached the front entrance, they spotted a car bearing the Nostrade family crest. "Huh? Isn't that the Nostrade family emblem? What are they doing here?" Blue Rat asked, clearly surprised. The Grey Rat, knowing about Ush's connection to Neon Nostrade, didn't seem fazed. "It's probably one of Ush's classmates. Don't worry about it." But Blue Rat blinked in disbelief. "Wait. Ush is connected to the Nostrade family? That's huge. As far as I know, there aren't many kids in that family right now." He paused. "Wait. Ush's classmate. Don't tell me that girl is Neon Nostrade?" Blue Rat stared at the hotel in stunned silence. If he didn't know this was Ush's home, his mind might have gone somewhere else entirely. A girl showing up at a guy's hotel early in the morning? Come on. You didn't need to be a genius to connect the dots. Sure, maybe they're just playing cards. Yeah. Right. That's right, the Grey Rat replied casually. It's not exactly a secret. If you do a bit of digging, it's easy to find out. Without saying more, he led Blue Rat inside the hotel. "Welcome, oh, Mr. Hawk." The boss and Madam just stepped out. Bessie paused mid-greeting when she recognized the Grey Rat entering. She called him Mr. Hawk, because his real name was Sway Hawk. "No worries," Grey Rat waved it off. "I'm here to see Ush. Is he available right now?" Bessie's expression shifted to something more teasing. She gave him a knowing smile. "I don't know. Miss Neon hasn't been here for long." Her tone clearly implied something, and the Grey Rat understood immediately. If Neon was with Ush, then yeah, maybe they shouldn't interrupt. Regardless of the reason for their visit, barging in would be a terrible idea. If his sister, Ush's mom, heard about it later, the Grey Rat was pretty sure he'd be facing his own funeral. "All right, I'll wait," he said, nodding. He led Blue Rat to the lounge area and sat down. "How long are we gonna wait?" Blue Rat grumbled, rubbing his temples. "Should we just text him?" The Grey Rat thought for a moment, then nodded. A message wouldn't hurt. If Ush was busy, he wouldn't see it. If he wasn't, he'd reply. And most importantly, it wouldn't interrupt anything with a loud ringtone or knock at the door. He sent the message. Moments later, Ush replied. "Brother-in-law, just come in." Ush set his phone down and gave the girl in front of him a wry smile. Winter break had just started last night, and Neon had already shown up at his place first thing in the morning. She announced that she wanted to travel with him. The reason? Apparently, she'd heard a rumor about some small village that was enshrining the golden body of a sage, and she wanted it. She planned to buy it for her collection. But the trip would be boring alone, so of course, she decided to drag Ush along. What a wild lifestyle. But Ush didn't complain. Hobbies, collections, spontaneous adventures. That was just how Nyan lived. Chapter 88. Nyan was full of energy and excitement, but the timing was off. Ush had his mind set on going to Heaven's Arena during winter break, to earn some quick money and recover the costs his family had incurred. On top of that, he still needed time to train. There was no way he could afford to waste time wandering around. Especially considering what was coming later this year. After September, once all the 10 Dons were dead, York New City would likely descend into complete chaos, a true underworld free-for-all. Before that storm hit, Ush needed to become strong enough to stand above everyone else. As for the favor he'd received from the 10 Dons over the years, he wasn't interested in paying it back. Sure, technically, Ush had earned their goodwill through his own effort. But he wasn't going to stick his neck out for them, because now, there were people in his life he actually cared about. His parents, his brother-in-law, Nyan, Bessie, and even Nyan's father. His circle of people to protect was no longer small. And come September, it would be nearly impossible to evacuate all of them from York New City. Ush still had school. His parents wouldn't abandon their business. His brother-in-law's entire foundation was here. When the Mafia wars hit full swing, he wouldn't have the luxury of disappearing. If he left now, he'd lose his place in the underworld entirely. As for Bessie, while her family was from York New, she could be convinced to evacuate temporarily if her parents agreed. Nyan, on the other hand, wouldn't leave. From her perspective, staying near Ush was probably the safest option anyway. And her father, Light Nostrade, would never flee. He'd only ramp up his private security. Ush would never abandon his loved ones to go play bodyguard for the 10 Dons. Maybe he'd give them a heads up before things fell apart, but knowing their arrogance, he doubted they'd even listen. Nyan, Ush said, looking at her seriously. I really need to focus on my training right now. This winter break, I plan to head to Heaven's Arena for some matches. I can't go chasing after that golden sage statue with you. Nyan puffed her cheeks. But Ush is already super strong. She wasn't trying to hold him back, she genuinely believed in his strength. After all, he'd taken down all her bodyguards effortlessly. What more proof did she need? Ush chuckled and tapped the tip of her nose. I might seem strong to you, but compared to the real monsters out there, I'm still far behind. There are people even stronger than you? Nyan blinked in disbelief. Of course. Ush grinned. The day I can destroy a mountain with a single strike, that's when you can say I'm strong. Destroy a mountain? Nyan's jaw dropped. That was terrifying. She'd thought Ush was already overpowered, but clearly, she'd underestimated what he considered strong. Really? Nyan leaned against him, voice soft. Would I lie to you about something like that? Ush smiled. Knock knock. Before she could ask more, a knock came from the door. Come in, Ush called out. Click. The door opened, revealing the gray rat and blue rat. Brother-in-law, you needed something? Ush asked, cutting right to the point. Gray rat hesitated, then began describing what had happened the night before. He explained how they'd clashed with the Green Snake Gang, how knives didn't work, how bullets didn't stop them, and how the enemy seemed inhumanly strong. Blue Rat chimed in, helping fill in any details that were missed. Ush sat quietly, holding Nyan back from interjecting, letting the two men finish. After they were done, he summarized. So, last night, your territory was hit in multiple places by Green Snake Gang members. These attackers were strong, barely affected by blades, and needed dozens of bullets to be taken down. Is that right? Blue Rat nodded quickly. Exactly. It's not that we can't fight one or two of them, but there were at least 30 of those freaks. We didn't stand a chance. I knew it. Nyan suddenly burst in, unable to hold back any longer. That's the work of a Nen user. She hadn't trained a Nen herself yet, But that didn't mean she wasn't familiar with it. After all, her boyfriend was an Nen user. If she didn't know the basics, how could she ever keep up with him? Nen user? Gray Rat and Blue Rat said in unison, clearly shocked. They looked at each other, then turned back, both confused. Wait. What's a Nen user? Blue Rat asked sheepishly. Gray Rat didn't say anything, but from the look in his eyes, he clearly had no idea either. It's just a title, Ush said casually. You could call them immortals, psychics, mages, whatever helps you get the idea. He didn't mind explaining things to his brother-in-law and his friends. He wouldn't even mind teaching them if they had the potential. As for the supposed rule about not spreading Nen knowledge, Ush didn't care. If it mattered to him, he'd teach it. If someone tried to stop him, well, they could try fighting him. That said, something did occur to him. Netero had only sent him the Nen body refinement technique. He hadn't included anything about how to awaken someone's Nen. No Ten, no Ren, no Hatsu. Not even the basic flow control. In other words, if Ush wanted to teach Gray Rat and Blue Rat, he'd have to forcibly awaken their Nen using the method of opening the aura nodes. And based on their current talent level, they weren't ready. Forcibly awakening them would do more harm than good. So what do we do? Gray Rat asked, clearly frustrated. Blue Rat echoed the sentiment, visibly discouraged. The Green Snake Gang's new strength was way beyond what they could handle with conventional means. And if Nen was involved, they were completely outmatched. Chapter 89. It's not a big deal, Ush said casually, waving his hand. If there really is an Nen user involved with the Green Snake Gang, just call me when it happens. I'll come check it out. Even though Ush's current aura output was only approaching first-rate level, with his Nen ability and mastery over control, he could still hold his own against most first-rate Nen users, even without using his long-distance techniques. So someone hired by the Green Snake Gang? Ush didn't take that seriously. He didn't believe there were that many master-level Nen users out there. What were the chances one had just randomly crossed his path? Great! Blue Rat cheered enthusiastically. Gray Rat, on the other hand, hesitated for a moment and asked, Ush, is this going to be dangerous? Don't worry, brother-in-law. It's nothing serious. Just remember, if you see them again, call me and send your location. I'll get there as fast as I can, Ush replied with a grin. All right. I've got a feeling they'll make a move again tonight, Gray Rat said, a bit emotionally. After all, just a few years ago, Ush had been the kid he helped hide from his sister, the one with a few secrets and a big mouth. Now? He'd grown into someone who could protect him. The moment made Gray Rat a little sentimental. He couldn't help but think back to that phone call from a month ago, when he was panicked and Ush casually mentioned that someone had wiped out the Baldhead Gang. At the time, Gray Rat hadn't fully understood what Ush meant. Now? It had all sunk in. His nephew had really grown up. All right, uncle. Be careful tonight. Don't rush in recklessly, wait for me, Ush instructed him. His biggest concern now was that Gray Rat and Blue Rat might try to take on their enemies before he arrived. That would be a headache. Understood, understood. We're not that dumb. I'll hold your brother-in-law back if I have to, Blue Rat said with a laugh. He felt confident now. And if tonight they could take down the Green Snake Gang for good, the Meteorite Gang might just rise to second-tier status among York News Mafia. Thinking about that made Blue Rat's blood run hot. He silently vowed, I'm sticking with Ush for life. If he had Ush's support, there was nothing they couldn't do. Do what you have to, if necessary, tie him up, Ush said bluntly. Gray Rat blinked, then gave Ush and Blue Rat a look of disbelief. Wait, what do you mean tie me up? Shouldn't you at least ask before making decisions like that? Uncle, Ush sighed, rolling his eyes. You know your own temper. Don't make Mom nag you again. Gray Rat, can you act a little less impulsively for once? Blue Rat snapped. From their talk with Ush today, it was clear, Ush didn't mind helping. He just didn't want unnecessary attention. That meant, as long as they kept things discreet, they could absolutely count on him in a crisis. But Grey Rat, with his pride and bad habit of overthinking, couldn't seem to grasp that. Now that Blue Rat understood this, he couldn't help but sigh. He was even tempted to smack Grey Rat upside the head. So, he did the next best thing. He dragged Grey Rat out of the room. Watching his brother-in-law be pulled away like a sulking child, Ush chuckled. When it comes to street smarts, Blue Rat is way better than him. Fortunately, with Blue Rat keeping things in check, Ush wouldn't have to worry too much. At the very least, he'd make sure things didn't spiral out of control before Ush got there. The Green Snake Gang, huh? Guess I'll have to postpone my trip to Heaven's Arena, Ush muttered with a pout. Just as he said that, Nyon threw herself into his arms and looked up at him with a smile. Don't even think about it, I have actual business to handle, Ush said, guessing what Nyon was probably thinking. No, I want to see how Nan users fight, Nyon replied, pouting and leaning into him. Ush sighed. Didn't Rin Immortal and his crew fight in front of you already? That's different, Nyon protested. They were fighting their own people. But this time, you're going up against outsiders. And anyone who can control 30 people like that has to be strong, right? Ush shrugged. Honestly, the one I'm facing tonight might not be as strong as Rin. Nyon blinked, then waved her hand. Doesn't matter. I still want to see you fight. Ush laughed at her persistence, but this time, he didn't say no. With his current level of Nen control, he could easily create a protective 10 barrier around Nyon. Keeping her safe wouldn't be a problem. A few months ago, he wouldn't have been able to protect her while also fighting at full strength. But now? It was no big deal. This was the benefit of consistent mental training. All right, Ush said, nodding. But you have to stick close to me. Yay, I knew you were the best. Nyon squealed, hugging him tightly, her head burrowing into his chest like a drill. Since he wasn't heading to Heaven's Arena today, Ush wasn't in a rush anymore. His reasons for going were threefold. To earn money. To improve his combat ability. To observe the Nen abilities of other fighters. Now he had a fourth goal. To find Wing and get a proper Nen awakening method. No matter how strong he became, his loved ones, his parents, his brother-in-law, and those close to Nyon, were still his greatest weaknesses. If possible, Ush wanted them to at least have enough power to protect themselves. And Nen was the perfect tool for that. Chapter 90. Time flew by, and night fell quickly. Bang! In a city already buzzing with nighttime energy, a gunshot rang out in the Meteorite Gang's territory, marking the start of an all-out battle between the Green Snake Gang and the Meteorite Gang. Figures. Those guys really came back, Blue Rat muttered, gritting his teeth as he stared toward the sound of the shot. We knew this would happen, Grey Rat replied, frowning as he watched the distant skirmish. Tell the brothers to stay sharp. If they see any of those freaks again, the ones that won't die, just report it. Don't try to fight. Blue Rat nodded. Already done. I told them if those guys show up, just fall back. But shouldn't we call Ush now? Not yet, Grey Rat said firmly. If Green Snake didn't bring out that Nen user tonight, then there's nothing to worry about. Yeah, fair enough. Blue Rat replied, though his left hand was already on his phone, finger hovering over the send button. On his screen, Ush's number and a pre-typed message with the location. Clearly, he was prepared to act fast. Boss. They're here. A younger gang member ran up, breathless. That was the signal. Blue Rat didn't hesitate, he pressed send. Only once the message was confirmed did he exhale and tuck the phone away. Now things were in motion. He exchanged a nod with Grey Rat, and the two of them took a ready stance, calm, confident. Their composure impressed the nearby underlings. So this is what real bosses look like. Cool. Whether they were real bosses or not, Ush didn't know. But the moment he received Blue Rat's message, He picked up an excited Nyon and dashed straight toward the address. A few steps later. Eh? Where are we? Nyon gasped as her surroundings blurred. She blinked and suddenly realized she was standing on the rooftop of a tall building. Shh, keep it down, Ush whispered, covering her mouth gently and pointing down at the street below. Nyon followed his finger and spotted the chaos unfolding below. Gang members from both sides were clashing in the streets, but 30 figures stood out immediately. They were different. While everyone else ducked and dodged bullets, these 30 just charged forward through gunfire, showing zero hesitation. Only after being riddled with bullets would they back off, just enough to dig the slugs out of their flesh, then immediately return to fighting. If not for the meteorite gang's rotating suppressive fire, those monsters would have already stormed their headquarters. So this is what an end battle looks like? It's kinda boring, Nyon said after a few seconds, looking puzzled. They're not bulletproof, Ush murmured. They're just tanking the bullets? According to my brother-in-law, it takes 3 headshots to drop them. That's not normal. A manipulator-type Nen user wouldn't let their puppets survive 3 headshots. Could it be the dense swarmfish? Ush wondered aloud. No, that only keeps the body alive, it doesn't regenerate the brain after death. And once the conditions break, they die instantly. But these guys, their brains get destroyed and they still function. That's something else entirely. Interesting. He took out the pistol, calmly aimed at one of the supposedly invincible enemies, and fired. Bang! The bullet struck the man's skull. The kinetic energy tore a hole into his head, splattering brain matter everywhere. Thud. The man dropped, unmoving. Ush raised an eyebrow. Weird. Didn't they say it takes 3 shots? Careful. Someone out there's got good aim. One of the Green Snake Gang enforcers shouted to his comrades. But despite the warning, his face showed no concern. He kept shooting wildly. If the meteorite gang didn't have good cover, and if their aim was better, they might have already lost half their men. Ush narrowed his eyes, then raised his pistol again and fired at the big man's head. Bang! Splat! The same messy result. But then, his head regenerated, like nothing had happened. The man just kept going. What? Ush stared in shock. Even if the guy himself was weak, the Nen ability supporting him was insanely useful. Headshot immunity? That's busted. Then, crack! A faint snapping sound reached Ush's ears. He turned and saw the source, a thumbtack, split clean in half. His eyes narrowed in realization. It's not regeneration, Ush muttered. It's damage transfer. A clever ability. At first glance, it looked like time reversal. But instead of rewinding, the user was redirecting damage elsewhere. Maybe to an object, like a decoy, or even another person. And when that object broke, the stored damage was released. Between time reversal and damage transference, Ush honestly wasn't sure which was more Nen-intensive. One manipulated laws, the other manipulated concepts. But this was Nen. And Nen was built on pure idealism. Chapter 91. After deducing the Nen ability of the hidden user, Ush found himself even more intrigued. Even if the user probably wouldn't live long against him, Ush was fascinated by how the ability worked. Ignoring the chaos down below, he began scanning the surrounding buildings. An user, even one with transmutation or manipulation tendencies, wouldn't cast their ability from too far away. That kind of control range was rare. So Ush could guarantee the Nen user had to be within about 100 meters. If they weren't on the ground, then they had to be hiding somewhere up high. 10 seconds later. Ush grinned. Found you. Without hesitation, he picked up the confused Nyon and stepped out. My name is Yorun. I'm 16 years old. And I'm a superpower. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved games, and I've always had a knack for them. At age 12, I awakened my ability, something involving strange thumbtacks. After testing it out, I realized that when I stuck the tacks into a living being, it would increase their strength and defense. Later, I somehow figured out more about my ability. Game Monster. That's what my Nen power is called. It lets me use these tacks to turn people into monsters, like the kind you'd fight in a game. Kind of lame, honestly. I always imagined myself as the main character, showing off flashy skills. Instead, I'm just the summoner. The one who calls monsters to fight for him. Still, I found out this ability works on people, too, and it makes them way stronger. Even better, it can evolve. Now, at 16, I can embed 3 thumbtacks into one creature. That doesn't just make them stronger. It gives them a broken power, the ability to come back to life after death. That's right. Even if their head gets blown off, they come back. It's overpowered. I figured I'd rise to the top with this. But then, I came to York New with my family for vacation. And that's when things went wrong. Me? I was fine. I'm tough. Hard to kill. But my parents and younger sister? They were kidnapped by the Green Snake Gang. They threatened me, forced me to boost their guys with my thumbtacks, to fight against another mafia group called the Meteorite Gang. I went along with it. I was worried about my family. And hey, I figured both sides were shady anyway. All I wanted was for Green Snake to let my family go. Naive, right? Anyone with even a little experience in the underworld would know better than to trust a gang's word. Will Green Snake actually release my family? Maybe. They probably will, because they want to keep using me. But just because they say they'll let them go doesn't mean they won't watch them. Like, hey, we're friends. We'll just keep your parents and sister nearby to keep you from worrying. Creepy bastards. Don't worry, Mom. Dad. Sis. The fight ends tonight. I'll get you out, I whispered, eyes fixed on the battle raging below. Eh? If your parents and sister were taken, what are you still doing here? A voice asked behind me. Who's there? Yoran jumped in alarm and spun around, only to find a guy carrying a beautiful girl staring back at him. A natural Nen user? Ush narrowed his eyes, studying the teen. Still young. Still inexperienced. A little raw. Based on his muttering, Ush had pieced together most of the situation. The urge to kill him faded somewhat. A natural Nen user with a manipulation-type ability that could boost ordinary fighters? If Ush brought this kid into the Meteorite Gang under his brother-in-law, he might finally be able to leave For Heaven's arena without worrying. What are we? Nyon said bluntly, hands on her hips. We're the people who came to beat you up. Yoran frows, then frowned cautiously. I suggest you don't try. You can't beat me. Oh? You're strong? Nyon tilted her head. Ush had said the kid wasn't that impressive. But his confidence was making her hesitate. Of course I am, Yoran said proudly. I'm a superpower user. Guns don't even work on me. Ush rolled his eyes. Then how did your parents and sister get kidnapped? Yoran's face flushed. That's because they ambushed us. It wasn't a fair fight. He shouted toward the city, clearly angry at the Green Snake Gang. Then his face suddenly paled. His eyes darted to the door. Oh no. He turned and tried to run, intending to intercept whoever might have overheard his rant. But before he could take more than a few steps, Ush blocked his path. Move. I can't let them report what I said, Yoran shouted, trying to shove Ush out of the way. He wasn't weak, having embedded 3 thumbtacks, he should have had level 4 strength at least. But a few seconds later, he was staring wide-eyed. Ush hadn't budged an inch. It was like trying to shove a mountain. No, worse, an ancient tree that had rooted itself into the entire continent. He couldn't move him at all. If you're talking about those 2 guys outside. They're already dead, Nyon said sweetly, miming a hand chop. Yoran frows, horrified. Chapter 92. Hearing Nyon's words, the tourist didn't look relieved, instead, he panicked. Crap, Crap. If that green snake guy finds out they were killed, my parents and sister are done for. What do I do? What do I do? He muttered, spinning in place like a headless fly. Ush frowned as he watched the boy's frantic pacing. His mental fortitude is way too weak. But then, Ush's expression shifted slightly. That just meant this kid was still a blank slate, malleable, easy to influence. If Ush guided him right, he might become a loyal and capable subordinate in the future. Truth be told, Ush didn't like getting too involved in mafia politics. It was a distraction from his real goals. But reality wasn't that simple. As long as Ush cared about his family, he had no choice but to play by society's rules. Sure, if he became overwhelmingly powerful, so strong that he could ignore those rules entirely, he could act freely. But that would also isolate him. Even if his family survived, they'd be terrified of him. And that wouldn't be due to a lack of love, it would be a natural human instinct. If one day, Ush became a demon who towered above the world, even his parents would tremble, even as they tried to help him. Humans are complicated like that. True extremes usually only exist in madness. That's why, no matter how strong he became, rules couldn't be ignored so easily. Ush had to plan ahead for Yorknew's future. Whether or not the 10 Dons died later this year, he had to be ready. If they lived, things would continue as usual. If they died, then someone would need to stabilize Yorknew quickly. Whether that person was Ush or his brother-in-law didn't matter, the point was to take control. Though in terms of public recognition, his brother-in-law might still fall short. If they wanted people's trust, Ush would probably have to step up himself. So be it. He shook off the thought and turned his attention back to the boy pacing in front of him. "Why are you panicking?" Nyon asked bluntly. "Since they've already found out, just go rescue your parents and sister." To her, there was no concept of losing. Once, she might have thought that way. But not anymore. Not since Ush entered her life. "It's easy for you to say," the tourist snapped. "If I try anything, those bastards will just shoot them." Nyon blinked and looked to Ush for confirmation, then back at the boy. "But it's simple. Just rush in, kill the enemies, and save them. Right?" she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The casual, almost Versailles line made the tourist freeze. He slowly looked at Ush and Nyon, stunned. "You can do that?" he asked, voice full of disbelief. "We can," Ush replied flatly. "But what about you? This time, we're going to destroy the people helping the Green Snake Gang." He raised an eyebrow. "That includes you." Boom. The tourist dropped to his knees and bowed deeply. "Please. Help me. I'll repay you." Ush looked down at him, unmoved. He planned to make this boy his ally eventually, but if he made it too easy, the kid wouldn't value it. So Ush shook his head. "I don't need your repayment. I just plan to wipe out the Green Snake Gang." Even though it was a refusal, Ush was still showing his intentions. It wasn't total rejection, just enough to plant a seed. "I know where their base is. I'll lead you," the tourist said quickly, catching Ush's implication and adapting immediately. Ush nodded. "Good. Just don't try anything funny." "Of course not," the boy said, waving his hands nervously. He turned and began leading the way. Ush didn't care about verbal gratitude. Words meant nothing. It was loyalty that mattered. He was waiting for the day this boy would come back, desperate to follow him, and say it with his own conviction. That's when the real connection would begin. Respect or hatred, Ush could handle either. With a burning desire to rescue his family pushing him forward, the tourist sprinted ahead at full speed. Despite running with everything he had, Ush and Nyon stayed perfectly at his side, not even breaking a sweat. At one point, Ush even bought 2 cold drinks along the way. The boy gawked. How was that even possible? Still, he had no choice but to accept reality. There was always someone stronger, much stronger. For the first time, he set aside his pride as a superpower. Compared to Ush, he wasn't even in the same league. Time passed quickly. As the three of them moved through the city, The battlefield between the Green Snake Gang and the Meteorite Gang began to shift. Those invincible Green Snake thugs, once thought immune to bullets, suddenly started dropping. One man was shot, and didn't get up. He lay in a pool of blood, unmoving. Everyone froze. Then chaos erupted again, but this time, with very different expressions on each side. Chapter 93. One side was gripped by fear, the other by ecstatic triumph. They've lost their weird abilities. Attack! Grey Rat shouted, raising his pistol high. He was about to charge forward and take the lead himself when... yank! Blue Rat grabbed him by the collar and pulled him back. Calm down. He was shaken but relieved. Good grief, if something happened to Grey Rat right now, there was no telling what Ush would do. Still, Blue Rat turned to his partner with an annoyed glare. Don't get reckless. Then he raised his own pistol, pointed it at the now confused Green Snake grunts, and yelled, "Don't let them escape, avenge our brothers." Bang! 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 He fired the first shots. In truth, they didn't even need the command. Everyone could see the situation had turned. The gangsters who had just barely held back their fury suddenly found their target. They opened fire wildly. Caught off guard, the Green Snake grunts panicked. Gone was their brazen confidence, they no longer ran across the battlefield unchallenged. Damn it! What's happening? Why are our abilities gone? What did that kid do? The grunt leader shouted in frustration. Be Brother Yellow Snake. Could it be something happened to that kid? Another stammered. Yellow Snake froze for a second. Right. The kid said his ability only works within 100 meters. If he dies, or moves too far, the effects vanish. His eyes widened. Call the two guards. The ones watching him. Find out what's going on. They made several calls. No answer. Yellow Snake gritted his teeth. Crap. Something did happen. Without hesitation, he called his boss, Green Snake. What's wrong? Green Snake asked, surprised to get a call so soon. Yellow Snake responded nervously, Boss, something's happened. Either the kid escaped, or he was taken out. The brothers who were enhanced by his ability, they're down. We're getting wiped out by the Meteorite Gang. What? Green Snake barked in disbelief. He had just convinced himself the Meteorite Gang had no real muscle, and now this. No, Green Snake muttered after a pause. It's not the Meteorite Gang. That kid must have taken this chance to try and rescue his family. He clicked his tongue. Trying to pull a fast one on me, huh? Still too naive. He turned to his underlings. Bring his parents and sister here. I want to see how far he's willing to go, with dozens of guns pointed at them. Soon, a few grunts dragged out 3 trembling hostages, a middle-aged couple and a chubby little girl with pale skin and frightened eyes. They were flanked by 2 armed guards. The 3 huddled close, clearly terrified and completely unaware of what was going on. They had been under house arrest until now, and while they hadn't lost hope, something about this sudden change made them anxious. Green Snake didn't waste time talking to them. He just stood and waited, certain someone was coming. And he hoped it would be the boy. Because if it was, then everything was under control. If it wasn't, that meant something far worse was happening. 10 minutes passed. In that time, the firefight outside had ended. Without the boy's Nen boost, the Green Snake grunts were nothing special. Just regular thugs. And when morale flipped, the Meteorite Gang struck hard. With superior marksmanship and sheer fury, they overwhelmed the remaining enemy. The Green Snake Gang's front line was practically annihilated. Only a few had the sense to escape before things completely collapsed. For the Meteorite Gang, it was a total victory. Green Snake scowled as the news came in. Then, suddenly, Green Snake! A furious voice roared from outside. Boom! The doors of the main hall exploded inward, the force blowing them clean off their hinges. A teenage boy stormed in, eyes burning with rage. Click click click. Dozens of guns immediately turned on him, Only 3 remained fixed on the hostages. But even with all that firepower pointed at him, the grunts didn't look confident. They knew this kid. Unless they could land a clean headshot, which was nearly impossible while he was moving, he wouldn't go down. And if they were that good, they wouldn't be stuck working low-tier gigs like this. Still, after glancing at the terrified family being held at gunpoint, the gangsters relaxed again. They had leverage. He wouldn't dare to fight while hostages were involved. Green Snake stepped forward, a cruel smile on his lips. "Tourist. You disappoint me," he said coldly. "I didn't want to believe it was you. But it was. You abandoned us mid-battle, betrayed us. Dozens of my brothers are dead because of you." He raised his hand. "So what now, huh? How should we settle this?" He gestured toward the hostages. "Should I shoot your father? Your mother? Or maybe your sister? Or maybe I'll give you a better option, help me take out the Meteorite Gang's leader instead. Pay me back with 1 life for each I lost tonight." Green Snake sneered. "I'm giving you a choice. Make it." Chapter 94. As Green Snake's voice faded, the atmosphere turned tense and oppressive. The tourist's parents and sister looked at Green Snake in horror, then turned their eyes to the tourist. The other members of the Green Snake gang watched the boy with mocking expressions, eager to see him struggle, break down, and be crushed by his own choice. The tourist remained silent, head lowered, seemingly deep in thought. If he had looked up, he would have noticed the anxious looks on his parents' faces. They were lightly nodding their heads, subtle gestures meant for him alone. What did it mean? Only they knew. But in truth, the couple were silently pleading for him to choose them, not his sister. They hoped he'd understand. But as the tourist kept his head bowed, showing no sign of noticing, they grew more and more anxious. If they hadn't been held at gunpoint, they would have shouted at him by now. Everyone expected the tourist to lift his head soon and give his answer. But minutes passed, and he didn't move. Green Snake, growing impatient, frowned and said coldly, "You have 3 more minutes. If you don't choose, then I'll choose for you." The moment those words landed, the tourist suddenly raised his head and swept his gaze across the room. When his eyes landed on his family, he paused. Then the corners of his mouth curled into a grin. "Your choices are all too boring," he said to Green Snake. "I want to pick a different one." "What? A different one?" Was he insane? The gangsters exchanged confused, uneasy looks. "Stop playing games," Green Snake growled. "Those are your only options." The tourist shook his head calmly. "I want to replace your list of targets with you." His eyes locked on Green Snake, overflowing with killing intent. "He's gone mad." The gangsters around them were shocked. They couldn't believe the kid would be this reckless. Didn't he care that his family was being held at gunpoint? Their eyes flicked toward the hostages, only to freeze. Wait a second. Wasn't there supposed to be 3 grunts guarding the hostages? They blinked. Yes, the hostages were still there. But so were 2 unfamiliar figures. When had they arrived? The realization hit like a truck. In this tightly secured room, 2 unknown people had just appeared without anyone noticing. That alone was terrifying. Who the hell are you?" one of the grunts yelled, instinctively turning his gun on the newcomers. "SHHK." 3 sharp, swift sounds cut through the air. Thud. The 2 mysterious figures, Ush and Nyan, calmly retracted their hands. The 3 grunts collapsed to the floor, clutching their throats in agony. Each of them had a small, clean hole, about the width of a finger, punched straight through their necks. They died almost instantly. "Oh? What's wrong? Didn't you say you were attacking us tonight?" Ush asked, tilting his head and smiling casually. "Did you forget already? Memory that bad?" The gangsters stiffened. Wait a second. That guy. Was he the one responsible for the Meteorite Gang's sudden comeback? Even Green Snake gasped, a cold sweat forming on his back. Some of his men gulped audibly. "You, "You're from the Meteorite Gang?" Green Snake asked, eyes wide. He had been certain there were no real powerhouses backing the Meteorite Gang. Now, that assumption was crumbling. "Nope. I'm not," Ush said, waving his hand casually. "SHHK." Without another word, he flicked his fingers, and more grunts dropped, lifeless. "I just don't like people pointing guns at me," he said mildly. "Those three just broke that rule. Unlucky." Thud. 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 All the remaining gangsters who had started raising their weapons quickly turned them away again, suddenly very interested in not dying. A few even looked like they were trying not to breathe too loudly. Ush's sheer presence made them second-guess every move. Green Snake trembled with rage but said nothing. He didn't dare. Instead, he swallowed his fury and forced a composed expression. "If you're not with the Meteorite Gang, then why are you interfering in our business?" "Oh, that?" Ush said, as if just remembering. "SHHK." Another few fingers flicked out, more corpses hit the ground. "Because you kidnapped my friend's family." Silence. The room froze. It felt like time had stopped. The Green Snake Gang members turned pale, realizing the full extent of what they had just provoked. They weren't just dealing with a strong non-user, they had messed with someone he cared about. 2 seconds passed. Then Green Snake snapped. "Shoot," he roared, raising his pistol and firing at Ush. Boom. The moment the words left his mouth, the true battle began. But it wasn't Green Snake who moved first. It was Ush. Chapter 95. Poof. In less than 2 seconds, the members of the Green Snake Gang fell like puppets with their strings cut, collapsing one by one. Their vitality faded instantly. "Whoa. S so strong," the tourist stammered, staring in horror at the scene before him. His voice trembled. He had already thought he was overestimating Ush's strength. But now he realized, he had vastly underestimated it. With speed that couldn't even be seen, Ush wiped out a room full of armed men in an instant. The tourist wasn't sure he could even last 3 seconds against someone like him. Even with his triple resurrection ability, Ush could probably kill him dozens of times before he could react. His own strength felt laughably small in comparison. "Now," Ush said casually, not paying any mind to the tourist's song, "tell me, what did you learn from what just happened?" The tourist blinked in confusion. Don't mess with the wrong people?" he said hesitantly. Ush nodded. "And?" Cut the grass and pull out the roots. Kill the enemy fast to protect your family?" the tourist added, more confidently this time. Ush gave another nod. "And?" "I dunno," the tourist admitted, scratching his head. Ush smirked. "Never trust anything a gang says." "Even you?" the tourist asked cautiously. "Yes. Even me," Ush replied without hesitation. It wasn't a joke or false humility. Ush was being completely honest. If he wanted to earn this boy's loyalty, not through manipulation, but through respect, he had to lead with honesty. He didn't believe in swaying people with flowery speeches or fake kindness. No one, especially a stranger, would become a lifelong loyal servant just because he saved their family once. If you looked at all the stories out there, real or fictional, the people who were truly loyal were the ones who were treated with real care. It wasn't about rank or power. It was about earned relationships. Sure, some might use fear or control to bind others. But that kind of loyalty always broke eventually. Ush didn't want subordinates like that. If this boy ended up staying in Yorknew, helping the Meteorite Gang and Ush's brother-in-law survive until Ush became a master-level NEN user, that was all he asked for. After that, he wouldn't need anyone's help to protect his family. "Nyan, time to go," Ush called over to her, picking her up effortlessly. In a flash, they disappeared from the hall. "Wait!" the tourist shouted, just realizing what had happened. He wanted to stop Ush, to ask what he meant by all that. Why be so upfront? Why give advice like that and then just leave? He'd assumed Ush was trying to recruit him. But now he wasn't sure at all. He stepped forward instinctively, but it was already too late. Ush was gone. A few seconds later, the boy sighed. This wasn't a place he could stay. Gathering his still shaken family, the tourist quickly escorted them away from the area. As for where he'd go next, Ush didn't need to know, not yet. He knew the tourist would find him again someday. For now, Ush had other things to take care of. Toot toot. The phone rang, and Grey Rat's anxious voice immediately came through the line. Ush. How'd it go? It's done. Nothing big, Ush said casually. Go finish cleaning up the Green Snake Gang's leftovers. Ha. Easy for you to say. Grey Rat muttered with a tired laugh. All right, I'll take care of it. Leave the cleanup to your dear brother-in-law. They exchanged a few more updates about the situation, especially what had happened with the tourist, before Ush hung up. He wasn't in any rush to bring the boy under his wing. Tomorrow, he would head to the Heavens Arena. He'd let the tourist train under Grey Rat for now. That would be enough to see what kind of person the boy truly was. Let's go. I'll take you home, Ush said, turning to Nyeon. Nope. I'm not going home, she replied instantly. Her tone was firm. And Ush knew exactly why. Uncle's not home again? He asked with a smirk. Nyeon pouted. Exactly. He's gone again. It's my vacation, and he's nowhere to be found. Always off at some dumb banquet. Ush chuckled and rubbed his temple. All right. You can come to my place. Yay tilde. Nyeon cheered, immediately clinging to Ush's arm like a koala. This time, instead of teleporting, Ush chose to walk, at Nyeon's request. They strolled through the city, stopping for snacks and drinks, wandering through shops. By the time they got home, an hour and a half had passed. Chapter 96. Early the next morning, Ush's internal clock woke him up right on time. But unlike usual, where he would get up and go wash without hesitation, this time, Ush simply lay there, quietly staring at the ceiling. He didn't move for a full minute. Then, slowly, he turned to his side. Nyeon was still asleep beside him. Ush smiled and shook his head gently. Then, without a word, he slipped out from under the covers and stood up. The state of the bed, like a battlefield in the aftermath, said more than enough about what had happened last night. There was no need for explanation. After washing up, Ush returned and gently woke Nyeon. No. I wanna sleep more. Nyeon groaned as she clung to Ush like a koala, her voice full of sleepy defiance. No can do, Ush said, tugging at her stubbornly. Get up and wash. You can sleep again after we get on the airship. That's right, Ush had agreed to take Nyeon with him to the Heavens Arena. As it turned out, men do have weaknesses. Last night, Nyeon had pulled out every trick in the book, and Ush found himself unable to say no. Nyeon paused for a moment, then let out a sleepy, playful whine. Then you help me. And so, with Nyeon too lazy to move, Ush reluctantly helped her wash up. It was an unusual scene. One that's hard to describe in words. Let's just say it involved a lot of going back and forth, and a metaphorical sword leaving its sheath more than once. By the time they were finished, a whole hour had passed. After a quick breakfast, the two boarded the Nozer family's private airship, accompanied by a few maids and bodyguards. Nozer himself came to see them off, wearing a wide, foolish-looking grin as he waved them goodbye. It was obvious he already knew about Ush and Nyeon's relationship. Once Ush had departed York New City, the city itself buzzed with excitement following the Green Snake Gang's sudden downfall. Hey, did you hear? Last night, the Meteorite Gang wiped out the Green Snake Gang and took over all their turf. PFF, that's old news. And besides, I heard it wasn't even the Meteorite Gang, it was one guy who took out the Green Snake Gang. The Meteorite Gang just scooped up the rewards afterward. TCH, says you. If it were that easy, why don't you do it? Come on, I'm being serious. They say the guy who did it is almost as strong as one of the Phantom Troop's Yin beasts. Can you believe that? The Meteorite Gang's connected to someone like that. They must have saved the world in a past life. No way. You really think they'll rise to first-rate status? Guaranteed. Now's the time to make connections with them, before everyone else does. Smart thinking. You're right, we're geniuses. Totally tilde. While rumors spread like wildfire, inside the Meteorite Gang's hideout, Grey Rat was pacing nervously. Blue Rat. Why the hell did you tell people Ush's strength was on par with a yin beast? If they find out, what do we do? Grey Rat demanded, his voice full of anxiety. Blue Rat just sighed and gave him a look. Relax. No one knows it came from us. As long as we don't admit it, it's fine. They won't need a confession, Grey Rat snapped. You think they'll just give up if we deny it? They'll investigate. They'll come for us, or for Ush? Despite all the reports and praise, Grey Rat still had trouble fully grasping Ush's strength. To him, Ush would always be the diligent student, the kid who studied art and quietly climbed his way up. This current Ush, so powerful, so feared, still felt like a dream. And it wasn't just in his head. The first time Ush helped the Meteorite Gang was during the fight with the Bald Gang, but Grey Rat only arrived after it was over. The second time, Ush killed Red Snake with a single, long-range strike, so fast, Grey Rat couldn't even see it. The third time? Another off-screen bloodbath. By the time Grey Rat arrived, all that was left were corpses. He'd never witnessed the power firsthand, just the aftermath. And now, outsiders were saying Ush was on the level of the yin beasts. How could he not be rattled? Grey Rat's concern made Blue Rat pause. He hadn't really thought that far ahead. He'd been too focused on using Ush's fame to elevate the gang's status. But now, it hit him. He might have made a serious mistake. Yeah, Blue Rat muttered. I got carried away. Thought I could use the hype to help us climb. He looked at Grey Rat and took a deep breath. But if the yin beasts come asking, I'll take the fall. I'll say it was me. That way, they won't go after the rest of the gang, or Ush? His voice was firm. Grey Rat stared at him. You're serious? Blue Rat nodded. Grey Rat let out a long sigh, rubbing his forehead. Let's just hope it doesn't come to that. Chapter 97. Seeing the Blue Rat's resolute expression, Grey Rat fell silent. 10 seconds later. Let's not panic just yet. We'll call Ush first and ask him directly, Grey Rat said, voice steady but clearly worried. Blue Rat looked at him and gave a wry smile. Did you forget? Ush left for Heaven's Arena this morning. If we want to talk to him, we'll have to call. Grey Rat blinked. Right, he had completely forgotten that. He pulled out his phone, ready to dial. Knock knock. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Reluctantly, Grey Rat put down the phone to address the interruption first. What is it? He asked the breathless subordinate who rushed in. Boss. There's someone outside asking for young Master Ush. For Ush. Grey Rat frowned. Who is it? If it were someone who truly knew Ush, they'd probably go to the hotel, not here. How did they even know to come to the Meteorite Gang? Grey Rat's thoughts started spinning. Meanwhile, Blue Rat's expression darkened. He suddenly had a very bad feeling about this. After all, he was the one who let the yin beast level rumor slip. If someone had come looking, and it wasn't friendly, he'd be drinking pee while doing a handstand before the day was over. Did he say who he was? Grey Rat pressed. The little brother hesitated, then said, he claimed he's the one who made those scumbags fearless last night. I don't know if it's true. What? Grey Rat shot up from his seat in shock. Blue Rat narrowed his eyes. Wait. He's not here to pick a fight, is he? No. No, he said he's here to repay a favor from young Master Ush. That's why he came, to return the debt and ask to follow him. Eh? Both Grey Rat and Blue Rat stared at each other, speechless. What do we do? Grey Rat asked awkwardly. Is this guy telling the truth? Blue Rat rubbed his chin, then responded seriously, whether it's true or not, he's definitely not ordinary. If he's the Nen user Ush mentioned, we need to treat him with caution. Have someone welcome him inside. I'll call Ush right away. Grey Rat nodded. Agreed. Let's play it safe. After instructing a subordinate to escort the visitor into the guest room, Grey Rat finally picked up his phone and called Ush. At that moment, Ush was deep in his morning training. He was practicing the Nenshi alchemy technique, pushing his strength toward the upper limits of what was possible at this stage. There was a very real threshold in power growth that Nen users encountered. This threshold varied by category. Enhancement users, 80 tons. Emission and transmutation, 60 tons. Manipulation, conjuration, and specialist, 40 tons. That wasn't to say growth would stop, but after that point, progress slowed drastically, and returns diminished significantly. This threshold depended heavily on talent. For someone like Ush, a specialist, 40 tons was the theoretical ceiling at stage 1. With average talent, it would take about 25 years to reach that. But Ush was anything but average. Given his talent and mastery of Nen control, he could do it in a few years, 25 times faster. Not only that, but he could likely break past the 40-ton mark and hit 50 tons in the first stage alone. And once he began fully integrating stage 2 of Nenshi alchemy, the threshold would double. 100+ tons wasn't just possible, it was likely. Ush had already figured it out. The few non-enhancer Nen users who could break 100 tons were all people who had mastered stage 2 of Nenshi alchemy. Nero. Biscuit. Members of the Zoldyck family. Jing, Kite, and maybe even Morel or Nov. They were elite for a reason. While rare, these individuals often hit their prime at a young age, climbing to the top in just a few years rather than decades. Ush was determined to become one of them. He knew the limits of this world could be measured. Take the testing gates at the Zoldyck estate. 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, and finally 256 tons. Why stop at 256? Why not 512? The answer was obvious, there's a limit, even in this world of superhumans. That was the bar Ush had to aim for, and exceed. Chapter 98. Brother-in-law, what's up? Ush paused his training when his phone rang, picked it up, and answered casually. Ush, someone came to our side asking for you. He said he owed you a favor from yesterday. What should we do with him? Grey Rat didn't bother with greetings and got straight to the point. Ush grinned. No problem. Just tell him to help out on your side for now, and wait until I get back. So, when will you be back? Grey Rat asked quickly. You idiot, Blue Rat interjected from the side, clearly annoyed. Ush is on winter break. Round trip will only take a month. He'll be back in March. Why are you even asking? Ah, right. Got it. Okay, Ush, we'll handle things here. Grey Rat chuckled sheepishly, gave a few more reminders to stay safe, and hung up. Now it was time to handle the tourist. Ush simply smiled, put his phone down, and resumed his training. A few days passed. Once the tourist confirmed that Ush had personally asked him to remain with the Meteorite gang, he agreed to stay. But, he made one thing clear, he wouldn't engage in crime. Well, to him, crime specifically meant avoiding drugs, gambling, and prostitution. But as for murder? Apparently, that didn't count. No one knew where he drew that line, but no one objected either. The Meteorite gang didn't deal in drugs, and even the gambling and vice sectors were handled through voluntary business, thanks to Grey Rat's paranoia about getting chewed out by his sister. And now by Ush too. Interestingly, since Ush got involved, even the gang members who once grumbled about not touching drugs or illegal business had suddenly gone quiet. The problem was, without shady income streams, the Meteorite gang's revenue took a hit. And they didn't have the connections or territory to start legitimate enterprises either, those were monopolized by the larger families in Ukexen. Trying to enter that arena would be the same as declaring war. Which was why Blue Rat, despite his sharp mind, had been stuck. For now, all they could do was hang on. Meanwhile, several days later, Ush and his group finally arrived at Heaven's Arena. The journey had been fruitful. Even with Nyon constantly glued to his side, Ush had maintained his training routine for Nenchi alchemy and control exercises. Thanks to the ongoing effect of his mental training fruit, both his manifest and potential aura reserves had grown steadily. Now, Ush had officially stepped into the first-class Nen user category. His manifest aura had passed 3,000, currently sitting at 3,100. His potential aura had climbed to 39,000. His physical strength had reached 13 tons. The growth rate had slowed, yes, but Ush was confident that within a year, he'd reach the theoretical cap for a Nen user like him, 100 plus tons. Of course, that was only theory. As a specialist, Ush's talent for raw strength was still lower than that of enhancers. If, somehow, he had been born an enhancer, Ush was certain he'd already be able to open the seventh gate of the Zoldyck trial door. That meant power beyond 256 tons. But he wasn't an enhancer. Ush shook off the disappointment and turned to Nyon, who was clinging to his arm. Nyon, I'm going to go queue up for registration. You can find a restaurant nearby and wait for me, he said gently. Okay, I'll wait over there, Nyon replied, pointing to a stylish cafe not far from the arena. Waiting in line under the sun? No thanks. Nyon had zero intention of standing in that mess. All right. Rin Shen, keep an eye on Nyon. If anything happens, call me immediately. Yes, Master Ush. Rin Shen and the other bodyguards responded promptly. Their respect for Ush had only grown over the past few days. Though they shared the same airship, Ush's presence had become increasingly overwhelming. It wasn't something you could see, it was something you felt. Even if it was just aura pressure, it was unmistakable. They didn't doubt his strength in the slightest. With that, the group split up. Ush joined the long registration line outside Heaven's Arena, while Nyon led the others to the restaurant, ordering some light dishes while she waited. Rin Shen, of course, kept a close eye on her. Meanwhile, Ush and Nyon had already drawn attention from nearby gangs. Who are those people? Looks like some big shots. One man muttered as he eyed Nyon and her entourage. Big shots? That's Nyon, the only daughter of the Nosri family, and she's also top 3 on the talent list. The guy she's with is even scarier, he's said to be connected to the 10 Dons. No way. That's her? And she's with him? Looks like the Nosri family just struck gold. The daughter's got favor with the 10 Dons, and the guy she's with might become one of their top enforcers. Their luck's crazy. Chapter 99. When it came to Ush and Nyon, almost every mid to large-sized Hay gang around the world, unless they were isolated or technologically behind, had already investigated and memorized their information. In fact, most of the top 10 names on the talent list were printed out by gang bosses and distributed to their underlings for study. Because they all knew the truth. These 10 people were going to be serious players in the future. If you didn't want to be tripped up later on, then aside from forming ties with at least one of them, the safest move was simple. Don't offend them. Ever. And now, it was clear that Ush had entered those ranks. It wasn't something Ush had sought out for himself, but influence and fear often moved on their own. And without him even realizing it, his reputation was already eliminating most threats that might have come his way. But people's hearts were unpredictable. Some were reasonable. Others were insane. While most accepted they couldn't do anything to Ush, there were always outliers, people who thought they could. Human nature is messy, and in the world of gangs, personal ties were weak unless they were familial. Status could change overnight. No identity was ever truly safe. Even someone ranked 3rd on the talent list or a high-value soothsayer could be marked. The Nosri family, after all, had risen fast over the past 10 years. They'd muscled in on turf and profits that once belonged to others. That alone made them enemies. If someone could take Nyeon out, and with her, the fortune-telling ability her family relied on, it would be a massive win. That kind of gain was enough to justify the risk. And so, while some Hae gang underlings talked in hushed admiration of Ush and Nyeon, others quietly slipped away. Outside the Sky Arena, a few gang members made hushed calls. "I saw that little fortune-telling girl. Yeah, she's got a few strong-looking bodyguards with her. I'll keep watch. Get over here ASAP. Also, she's with that Ush guy. You know, top 3 on the talent list. Think that'll be a problem?" "Alright, cool." Hanging up. Some wanted to eliminate Nyeon, wipe out the Noser family's golden goose. Others were after Ush, aiming to knock him off the talent list and open a spot for someone else. Would they have dared to try this if Ush were still in Ukexin? Absolutely not. But now? Ush had left the city, left without his family or visible guards. And as long as they moved in secret, there was no reason for anyone to trace it back to them. And if they succeeded, who would care about a crippled talent list member? That's how they saw it. They didn't have a perfect plan, but they didn't need one. After all, even the previous talent list member, Nicole, brought hundreds of gang members and several bodyguards with her when she traveled. Ush. He had none of that, just a girl and a few guards. Back in the line outside Sky Arena, Ush raised an eyebrow. Lining up was boring enough, but now, he was feeling some seriously hostile intent. He could sense it. His attention subtly shifted toward Nyeon's location. So far, most of the gangsters around had held back. They weren't ready to make a move. And for that, Ush didn't bother with them. But now, he'd heard a few underlings slink away and start making calls. For a moment, Ush considered killing them on the spot. But then he thought better of it. Why not let them play their hand first? For Nyeon's safety, however, he decided to take action. Ush pulled out his phone and dialed. "Nyeon, you still waiting for me?" he asked with a gentle tone. "Ush? You're done already?" Nyeon's voice was full of delight, clearly surprised he'd finished lining up so soon. "Not yet. Can you pass the phone to Rin Shen? I need to talk to him about something," Ush said. "Eh? You're gonna talk to Rin?" Nyeon pouted. Ush chuckled and said gently, "Just business. Be a good girl and pass it to him, okay?" "Fiend Rin. Ush wants you." Rin Shen took the phone. "Young Master Ush." "We've been targeted," Ush said quietly, his tone turning serious. "From now on, act natural. Don't start scanning the area. I need to lure these guys out. Your job is simple, protect Nyeon. In a moment, hang up and act like nothing happened. Write a message on your phone, but don't send it unless something goes wrong. I'll be there before anything can happen. But no matter what, Nyeon cannot get even a scratch on her." There was a pause. "Can you do that?" Chapter 100. After finishing his instructions to Rin Shen, the phone in Rin's hand was handed back to Nyeon. And just like that, Nyeon went right back to chatting with Ush, who was still standing in line. While he waited, she happily described the taste of the food and cold drinks she was enjoying. Good grief. If Ush didn't know she meant well, he'd almost think she was teasing him. "Ah, Ush, are you thirsty? I'll send you a cold drink." "Yep, I've decided." Before Ush could even reply, Nyeon had already made up her mind. Upon hearing this, the expressions of her bodyguards shifted drastically. It was far easier for them to protect Nyeon in one location than to guard her while she moved around. "So, miss, the sun is really strong out there right now. Why don't I take it over for you?" Skovra said anxiously. Yes. It's better if Skovra goes," the others quickly chimed in, eager to dissuade her. At first, Nyeon refused. But after multiple rounds of persuasion, especially from Ush, she finally relented. "Fine. But you better run fast," she said, pouting. "Of course. I'll go as fast as I can," Skovra promised, snatching the cold drink and dashing off toward Ush. Scover quickly reached the line where Ush stood, handed him the drink, and was immediately sent back to protect Nyon. Now sipping cold tea, Ush continued chatting with Nyon on the phone, laughing and joking while slowly advancing in the line. He ignored the curious or envious glances from the people lining up beside him. Eventually, it was finally Ush's turn. As he entered the towering Sky Arena, a 991-meter-tall, 251-story building, the fourth tallest in the world, Ush couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. But he had also overestimated the speed of the Hay gangs gathering here. Despite the time that had passed, none of the ones targeting him or Nyon had made a move yet. "Welcome. Please fill out this form," said a receptionist, handing him a clipboard with a smile. Ush scanned it. In addition to the standard personal information, there was a key field, combat experience. The higher your experience, the higher your initial placement, saving time climbing the ranks. Ush came here to train, earn some money, and find someone to teach him proper Nen awakening techniques. Low-level matches wouldn't help him much. So, without hesitation, he wrote down, 15 years of martial arts experience. Whether they believed it or not was up to them. After handing in the form, the receptionist entered his info into the system and smiled again. "You are number 3012. 3012, huh? Must be a busy day." Ush followed the flow of people and entered the bustling competition hall. A wave of heat hit him the moment he stepped inside, partly from the crowds, partly from the roaring energy of the crowd itself. Air conditioning wasn't enough to keep up. The massive room was arranged in a 4x4 grid of 16 rings, each hosting its own match. Fists flew. Sweat and blood hit the mats. The brutality of the fights ignited the crowd. The place was alive. And no one even noticed Ush's arrival. If you had no fame, no one here cared who you were. Looking around, Ush noticed many empty seats, surprising, given the noise. Clearly, most fans preferred watching the upper floor matches. These early fights were usually rookies flailing at each other, though for gamblers, scouting a rising star here could be valuable. The Sky Arena had a ton of betting options. You could place bets on individual matches, streaks, and even long-term climbs. One of the riskiest bets was to wager on a fighter making it from the ground floor to the 200th floor without a single loss. Say you bet on someone like Ush to win all 19 matches on the climb. If his starting odds were 5-1, and each tier added more odds like 2.3 times or 1.4 times, the final multiplier could be around 14 times. But if someone jumped to floor 50 from the start and then went all the way up, those odds could reach 3,125 times. A 100 million Jenny bet could yield 312.5 billion. But it was nearly impossible. And even if someone got close, the arena would often send snipers or blockers to prevent easy wins. That's why, even though the final payout was capped at 9,999 times, very few even tried. It was considered a gamble for suckers, or extremely confident maniacs. Ush, who hadn't known about this kind of bet before, lit up with interest. Why not? He decided to use 1 million Jenny from his pocket money to bet on himself reaching the 200th floor undefeated. Not too much, just enough to be fun. That way, he could avoid attracting attention or being manipulated. If it paid off, he'd turn 1 million into nearly 100 million. Not bad for a side hustle. And that's a wrap, hunters. Another epic Hunter x Hunter fanfic in the books. Big shout out to the original author, their info's in the description, so go show them some love for this masterpiece. If you're new here and love HXH as much as I do, drop a like and hit that sub button to officially become a hunter. Your support keeps this channel alive and honestly motivates me more than you know. Oh, and don't forget to check the community tab. I actually post stuff there, not just sub-begging like certain audiobook channels. Embarrassed smiley face emoji. That's it for now. Peace out, and love y'all, red heart emoji.